It began in fire and frost in the black forests of the Ardennes, beneath a winter sky heavy with snow. It was December 16, 1944, and the Western Front lay frozen, quiet, deceptively calm. Allied troops, exhausted from months of fighting across France, believed the war was nearly over. The Reich, they thought, was finished. Its armies broken, its cities burning, its will shattered. But deep within the woods of Western Germany, a different kind of storm was gathering. Tanks rumbled through the mist, engines muffled beneath the snow. Men in black uniforms checked their weapons, their breath freezing in the air. And at their head rode a man whose name would soon become synonymous with both ferocity and infamy. Joachim Peiper, commander of the SS Kampfgruppe Peiper, the armored spearhead of Hitler's last great gamble. This is the entire history of Kampfgruppe Peiper, the SS spearhead of the Battle of the Bulge, the vanguard of an offensive that began with ambition and ended in ashes. To understand Peiper and his men, one must first understand the madness that gave them purpose. By late 1944, Germany was collapsing. The Eastern Front was disintegrating under the weight of the Red Army. The Western Allies stood at the gates of the Rhine. Hitler, isolated in his mountain retreat, refused to accept defeat. In a desperate bid to split the Allied armies and seize the port of Antwerp, he conceived Operation Wacht am Rhein, the Battle of the Bulge. It was to be a final, daring strike through the Ardennes, the same forest the Germans had used to crush France in 1940. His dream was delusion, but it was one that still had teeth. For the assault, Hitler gathered the last of his armored strength, the 6th SS Panzer Army, commanded by Sepp Dietrich, and within it, its most feared formation, Kampfgruppe Peiper. Joachim Peiper was not an ordinary officer. At just 29 years old, he had already earned the Knight's Cross with oak leaves and swords, one of Germany's highest military honors. A devoted member of the Waffen-SS, he had served as Heinrich Himmler's personal adjutant before commanding armored units on the Eastern Front, where he gained a reputation for audacity, speed, and pitilessness. To his men, he was bold and charismatic, a leader who demanded total commitment and delivered results. To his enemies, he was ruthless, relentless, and unmerciful. He believed utterly in his mission, and that belief would drive him and his men into infamy. When the Battle of the Bulge began on December 16th, Peiper's orders were clear: lead the 1st SS Panzer Division, Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler, through the Ardennes, smash through the American lines, and seize key bridges over the Meuse River. He was to move fast, faster than anyone believed possible, cutting deep behind enemy lines before the Allies could react. Speed was his weapon, surprise his shield. His column Kampfgruppe Peiper was a fearsome assembly of over 5,000 men, 100 tanks, and hundreds of half-tracks, armored cars and trucks. Among his armored fist were the dreaded Tiger II, King Tigers, the heaviest tanks of the war. Against them stood the thin American line of the 81st Engineer Battalion, 9th Armored Division, and 99th Infantry Division, green, understrength, and unsuspecting. At dawn, Peiper's panzers burst through the fog. Villages fell in minutes, their defenses crushed beneath steel treads. American soldiers, caught off guard, fought desperately but were swept aside. Bridges were captured intact, roads clogged with fleeing convoys. The snow turned black with smoke and red with blood. Within hours, Peiper had advanced farther than any other German unit. His column became the spearhead of the entire offensive, the tip of the dagger aimed at Antwerp. His momentum seemed unstoppable, but the very strength of his advance would soon become his doom. As Peiper plunged deeper into the Ardennes, his supply lines began to stretch thin. The narrow, icy roads were choked with wrecks and retreating vehicles. Fuel convoys failed to keep up. Allied resistance, once scattered, began to stiffen. American artillery found its range. Air power, grounded by the winter fog, began to return as the skies cleared. Still, Peiper drove forward, taking towns like Stavelot, Gleize, and Stoumont in brutal close-quarter fighting. His men left a trail of destruction in their wake. Villages burned, prisoners shot, civilians executed. The brutality that had been his hallmark on the Eastern Front now came to Belgium. It was in one snow-covered field, near the village of Malmedy, that history would remember him most. On December 17th, Peiper's men captured more than 100 American prisoners, artillerymen of the 285th Field Artillery Observation Battalion. They were disarmed and gathered near a crossroads. Then, without warning, machine guns opened fire. The soldiers were slaughtered in the snow, their bodies left where they fell. 84 men were murdered. The Malmedy Massacre would become one of the most infamous war crimes of the Western Front, a symbol of the SS's cold cruelty and a shadow that would follow Peiper forever. But war has no patience for the guilty or the innocent. Within days, Peiper's advance stalled. His tanks, running dry, stood frozen in the snow. The Americans, now reinforced, closed in from all sides. General Courtney Hodges' First Army and General Patton's Third Army struck from the north and south, cutting off Peiper's route to the Meuse. His communications collapsed. His men, exhausted and starving, dug in among the ruins of La Gleize, surrounded and alone. For a week they fought like trapped wolves, holding off attacks, hiding in cellars, scavenging for fuel. But by December 24th, it was over. Peiper ordered his men to abandon their vehicles and escape on foot through the woods. Hundreds died in the cold. Those who survived melted into the forest, leaving behind wrecks that still litter the Ardennes to this day. The legend of Kampfgruppe Peiper ended as it began, with fire and silence. In less than 10 days, the unit had driven farther than any other German force in the Bulge, but it achieved nothing. The offensive itself collapsed by January. Hitler's final gamble had failed. The Reich's last panzers had burned themselves out against the will of an army that refused to break. For Peiper, the war was over, but his reckoning was not. Captured in 1945, he stood trial for war crimes, convicted for the massacre at Malmedy, and sentenced to death. The sentence was later commuted to life imprisonment, and after serving 11 years, he was released. Yet freedom brought no peace. He lived quietly in France until 1976, when unknown assailants set fire to his home. He died in the flames, a man consumed, finally, by the fire he had once unleashed. Kampfgruppe Peiper remains one of the most haunting symbols of the Battle of the Bulge, a story of skill and savagery, of courage twisted by ideology, and of men who fought not for victory, but for illusion. Peiper's unit represented the last fury of the Waffen-SS, brilliant in tactics, monstrous in execution. They fought with the precision of professionals and the cruelty of fanatics. Their advance, brief as it was, stands as a testament to the paradox of the Third Reich itself: genius harnessed to madness, valor in the service of evil. Today, the roads through the Ardennes are quiet. The forests that once echoed with engines and gunfire are still. The wrecks of Peiper's tanks lie rusting in museums and meadows, their metal slowly fading into earth. The snow that once buried the dead now falls over peaceful fields. Yet beneath that calm history whispers, reminding us how close ambition came to madness, and how the line between courage and cruelty can vanish in the fog of war. The story of Kampfgruppe Peiper is not one of victory or defeat. It is a warning, a reminder that the most dangerous men in history are not the loudest or the mad, but the capable, those who can turn obedience into destruction and leadership into terror. Tonight we return to that frozen forest, to the roar of engines in the night, to the glow of burning villages, and to the footsteps fading into snow. This is the entire history of Kampfgruppe Peiper, the SS Spearhead of the Bulge, Hitler's last blade in the West, and the final brutal echo of a war that was already lost. Before we begin, tell me, where in the world are you tuning in from? And what time is it for you tonight? Are you listening beneath quiet winter skies, or drifting off to the distant sound of engines buried in snow? Wherever you are, take a deep breath, settle in, and let me know. I'd love to hear where in time and place you're joining us from tonight. Autumn 1938. Bad Tölz, Upper Bavaria. A thin veil of fog hung over the Isar River as cadets of the SS Junkerschule assembled in precise ranks before dawn, their black uniforms glistening with frost. The air reeked of oiled leather, sweat, and discipline. The instructor, Sturmbannführer Paul Leto, barked the morning oath word by word. Meine Ehre heißt Treu, and the chorus of young voices broke the stillness like artillery fire. The Junkerschule was not merely a military academy. It was a psychological crucible designed to strip individuality and replace it with unwavering obedience. Each day began with obstacle runs over 6 kilometers, rifle drills with Carabiner 98 rifles, and lectures on racial doctrine led by visiting SS ideologues from the Russia office. Even the architecture enforced conformity. The barracks were arranged in perfect geometric symmetry around a central parade ground. Diaries recovered from Cadet Hermann Rost in 1941 record that failure to shout loud enough meant punishment runs carrying sandbags through snow until collapse. By design, humiliation created hunger for approval. By nightfall, the young men no longer thought in singular pronouns. They became the machine the Reich required. The training program at Bad Tölz followed what the SS termed Erziehung durch Härte, education through hardness, a doctrine outlined in the SS Dienstvorschrift 10/1 issued that same year. Recruits were tested not just in marksmanship or tactics, but in their ability to act without moral hesitation. Instructors emphasized decision in seconds, insisting that hesitation cost comrades' lives and betrayed weakness. Physical training accounted for 60% of the curriculum. Mental indoctrination filled the rest. They memorized passages from Mein Kampf, analyzed Hitler's speeches for leadership logic, and performed exercises in which compassion was labeled sabotage. Compared to the Wehrmacht's officer schools, which prized technical competence and professionalism, the SS Junkerschule pursued ideological purity above all else. Each cadet was screened for ancestry back to 1800, ensuring racial cleanliness as recorded in personnel file, Annentafel 224b. To graduate, a man needed neither academic excellence nor empathy. He needed absolute obedience and the will to kill. That distinction between Wehrmacht and Waffen-SS training was not academic, it defined the conduct of war itself. Where the army valued discipline and chain of command, the SS emphasized autonomy bound by fanatic faith. Wehrmacht cadets studied Clausewitz. SS cadets studied Himmler's speeches. In army tactical exercises, officers were taught to preserve their men. At Bad Tölz, they were taught that a dead SS man was better than a hesitant one. Field reports from the Inspectorate of the Waffen-SS dated March 1940, noted that SS platoon leaders were expected to lead from the front, even unto death. That doctrine would later explain the reckless aggression of units like the Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler under Peiper's command. To their creators, courage and cruelty were interchangeable virtues. Where the army built soldiers, the SS manufactured believers. That difference, subtle in the classroom, would soon stain entire battlefields red. September 1939. Poland. Joachim Peiper, then a 24-year-old adjutant to Reichsführer SS Heinrich Himmler, rode in a staff car bearing registration SS 149507 as it passed through burning villages near Wolkowek. Himmler's entourage observed security operations conducted by Einsatzgruppen, whose orders authorized execution of suspicious elements. Peiper's diary, preserved in the Bundesarchiv under file NS19/3903, records his detached fascination with decisive measures. He saw firsthand how ideology translated into operational practice, civilians treated as enemies, mercy equated with weakness. German army officers accompanying the column later complained that the SS's methods jeopardized discipline. Their memoranda, collected in the OKH Lagerberichte September 1939, described uncontrolled violence by SS personnel. For Peiper, however, it was revelation rather than revulsion. He wrote of Himmler's calm demeanor amid atrocities, calling it the steel composure of conviction. In that moment, brutality became efficiency in his eyes. The moral boundary blurred into doctrine. By May 1940, the lessons of Poland hardened into operational instinct. Peiper, now attached to the Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler Regiment, advanced through northern France during Fall Gelb. His convoy 30 Seed, Kfz, 250 half-tracks and 12 Panzerkampfwagen Fred tanks moved at a relentless pace of 40 kilometers per hour. The doctrine was simple. Speed equals survival. German records from the Panzergruppe Kleist operations log show that Peiper's column covered 180 kilometers in 3 days, exploiting gaps faster than the French could react. Where army divisions paused to consolidate, Peiper's unit drove forward through night and fog. The tactic mirrored what his instructors called Bewegungskrieg, war of movement, but stripped of caution. Civilian refugees clogged roads and Peiper ordered them cleared without delay. Witness statements from the French gendarmerie at Cambrai described machine gun fire over columns of evacuees. To Peiper's superiors, this was ruthless efficiency. To history, it marked the genesis of atrocity in motion. Behind that aggression lay calculated design, not chaos. The early Kampfgruppe structure, mixed units of armor, infantry, and artillery under one commander, allowed rapid, independent operations. Peiper's regiment tested this system first during the crossing of the Somme on June 7, 1940. German Army High Command recorded the experiment's success. Flexible grouping by mission, not structure, enabled decisive penetration, yet within SS ranks, autonomy fed arrogance. In contrast, Wehrmacht panzer divisions adhered to strict coordination and logistical synchronization, ensuring fuel and communication lines. Peiper's methods ignored such constraints. He believed momentum itself would sustain victory. That belief, learned in France and sanctified by early triumph, would later define his Ardennes gamble. Efficiency devoured restraint, and in its aftermath, the boundaries between tactical genius and moral void disappeared. The Junkerschule's graduates were not simply warriors. They were carriers of a psychological blueprint. Historian Bernd Wegner's analysis in Hitler's Political Soldiers quantifies it by 1941. over 70% of Waffen-SS junior officers had trained at Bad Tölz or Braunschweig. Their common language was ideology. Their common virtue was obedience. Peiper embodied that template perfectly, educated, eloquent, and utterly convinced of his mission. When he received command of an armored battalion in the East 2 years later, his men revered him not because he was kind, but because he was relentless. The institution had achieved its goal to make killing an act of faith. Each order executed without question reinforced the illusion that violence served purity. What began as discipline evolved into devotion, and devotion, once unmoored from morality, became catastrophe. By the outbreak of the Soviet campaign in June 1941, the hammer had been fully forged. Peiper's formation, molded by years of ideological and tactical conditioning, stood ready to wield destruction with precision. The Junkerschule's philosophy, born in the cold courtyards of Bad Tölz, had succeeded in fusing intellect with brutality, initiative with fanaticism. Their graduates were young, ambitious, and convinced that destiny favored the ruthless. Yet beneath the surface of triumph lay the seeds of ruin. Every salute, every shouted oath, every perfectly timed maneuver concealed a deeper corrosion. The machine they had built would one day consume itself in the snows of the Ardennes. But that reckoning was still years away. For now, in the summer of victory, the hammer gleamed, unaware it was already falling. June 22nd, 1941. Near the village of Dobrotvir, east of Lviv. The early dawn sky burned orange as Obersturmführer Joachim Peiper's column of SD.Kf said. 251 half-tracks roared past fields still slick with morning dew. His adjutant Untersturmführer Hans Darges noted in his diary that the engines of the Panzer III tanks of the 1st SS Panzer Regiment sounded like a hymn to momentum. The unit advanced 20 kilometers by noon, smashing through Soviet border defenses of the 41st Rifle Division. Every meter forward was mapped, logged, and radioed to the Leibstandart SS Adolf Hitler headquarters under Sepp Dietrich's command. The attack order, labeled Operations Befehl Nummer 1 Barbarossa, instructed Peiper's men to penetrate to Lviv without hesitation, maintaining offensive spirit at all costs. The air was thick with burning oil, acrid gunpowder, and adrenaline. The adjutant wrote later that Peiper did not look at the bodies, only at his watch. It was the beginning of a campaign that would define both his reputation and his moral descent. The technical precision of Peiper's tactics became legendary among his peers. His armored spearheads covered over 100 kilometers in 3 days, averaging speeds unheard of in the muddy Ukrainian countryside. The Panzer IV Osse J tanks used Maybach HL 120 engines, producing 300 horsepower, giving them an operational range of 160 kilometers on internal fuel. Radio coordination between tank and infantry platoons was maintained through Fuig 5 transmitters, allowing for synchronized assaults, even when visibility dropped below 50 meters in smoke and dust. Compared to the slow, decentralized Soviet BT-7 formations, Peiper's command structure allowed split-second adaptation. He once told his adjutant, "Speed is protection, speed is mercy," but in practice, speed became a weapon of annihilation, overwhelming defenders before they could surrender. Every kilometer conquered reinforced his belief that aggression itself was a form of strategy. That belief would harden into something far darker as the campaign unfolded. By July, the SS Spearhead pushed toward Zhytomyr, confronting the Soviet Fifth Army. The difference in doctrine between the two sides was stark. German tactical manuals such as H.DV 300 Truppenführung emphasized flexibility and initiative, allowing junior officers to act independently once objectives were clear. The Red Army, shackled by Stalin's rigid control and fear of unauthorized retreat, relied on pre-approved orders that often arrived hours too late. Peiper's adjutant observed that our enemies obeyed their officers as we obeyed our instincts. Yet this freedom also enabled ruthlessness. When reports surfaced of Soviet partisans ambushing supply columns near Berdichev, Peiper ordered immediate cleansing of surrounding villages, a euphemism his adjutant admitted. No one misunderstood. The Wehrmacht documented similar orders but rarely executed them so completely. For Peiper's men, speed and severity became indistinguishable tools of command. The brutality reached its zenith by December 1941 near Kharkov, where temperatures dropped below -30 degrees Celsius. Peiper's battalion, cut off from supply, faced encirclement by Soviet forces of the 38th Army. The unit had suffered 60% casualties since June, reduced from 800 to barely 300 combat-ready men. Yet discipline held. Peiper ordered defensive arcs around the village of Velika Danilivka, using captured Soviet T-26 tanks as stationary bunkers after draining their remaining fuel. Field reports from the Kriegstagebuch der Leibstandarte describe his methodical calm under impossible pressure. When radio contact was re-established on December 29th, Peiper's voice was the first heard. "We are still mobile." The breakout that followed killed over 2,000 Soviet soldiers and cost Peiper 40 more men. His adjutant noted that we left no one behind, living or dead. The efficiency of survival had eclipsed compassion entirely. What Peiper learned in the East was not merely battlefield efficiency, but psychological conditioning. Himmler's December 1941 directive, Befehl zur Sicherung des Hinterlandes, praised Peiper's decisive harshness against banditry. That phrasing masked widespread executions of civilians accused of aiding partisans. Peiper's adjutant saw Himmler personally decorate his commander in Kiev, the Reichsführer calling him Mein junger Wolf des Ostens, my young wolf of the East. The title stuck. For Peiper, such recognition confirmed that brutality was not a failure of morality, but a validation of loyalty. His efficiency earned him rapid promotion to command elements of the 1st SS Panzer Regiment by early 1942. The adjutant remembered thinking, he was the kind of officer who could make men march through hell because he already had. Comparisons with regular Wehrmacht officers reveal how extreme Peiper's transformation was. Reports from General Heinz Guderian's Panzergruppe's Way stressed restraint, noting that discipline extends even to mercy. Peiper's own after-action reviews, stored in the Bundesarchiv Militärarchiv under file number RH19-263, omit civilian casualties entirely. Soviet counterintelligence documents from the NKVD, captured after the war, list his battalion as responsible for acts of extermination in occupied zones between August and November 1941. These records were ignored by Berlin, as Peiper's operational results were too valuable. His adjutant wrote in early 1942, "No one asked what villages burned. They asked how fast we advanced." Success and silence became inseparable. The operational toll on men under Peiper's command was immense. Frostbite, dysentery, and psychological collapse claimed nearly as many soldiers as enemy fire. Yet the unit's cohesion remained unbroken. The adjutant recalled men cleaning their MG-34s with frozen rags, their fingers cracked and bleeding, whispering, "Peiper will get us through." That faith in leadership fused personal survival with obedience to brutality. Technical mastery, fuel conservation, march discipline, efficient radio relays was no longer separate from moral decay. Each precision maneuver existed beside an atrocity. In that contradiction lay the essence of Peiper's legend, mastery without mercy. The adjutant later admitted, "We became the reflection of the man we followed." By the spring of 1942, Peiper's battalion withdrew west for refitting. Its survivors hardened beyond recognition. The eastern wind followed them home, a whisper of burned fields and unburied dead. Himmler's staff cited Peiper's unit as exemplary in spirit and execution, while Wehrmacht officers privately called them fanatics in uniform. The adjutant, writing years later from captivity, described how Barbarossa made beasts of us and heroes of him. The lessons learned in the frozen fields of Kharkov would become the tactical foundation for the Ardennes 3 years later. Strike fast, strike hard, and feel nothing. What began as efficiency in Livy had become doctrine by the Dnieper, and the young wolf, once unleashed, would never again be tamed. February 20th, 1943. Outskirts of Kharkov. The snow was blackened by the soot of burning tanks, and the wreckage of T-34s lay half buried in ice like carcasses of frozen beasts. The veteran, a gunner from 3rd Company, 1st SS Panzer Regiment, recalled how Peiper stood atop his command half-track, binoculars pressed to his face as he ordered, "Forward through the fire." Operation Donnerschlag had collapsed weeks earlier, and the Soviet 3rd Tank Army now pressed hard into the city's western approaches. Peiper's Kampfgruppe, barely 150 armored vehicles, was tasked with halting a Soviet advance 5 times its size. The engines of the Panzer IV Gs howled at 2,600 revolutions per minute as they surged through snowdrifts more than half a meter deep. "We fought by the stopwatch," the veteran said, recalling Peiper's obsession with timing down to the minute. The roar of engines, the hiss of flamethrowers, and the crash of collapsing buildings blended into a single mechanical symphony, and in its rhythm, Peiper found both his brilliance and his blindness. Peiper's tactical innovation at Kharkov relied on speed, concentration, and violent shock. His formation advanced in wedge patterns, each panzer platoon supported by a half-track mounted with twin MG-40-2 machine guns firing at 1,200 rounds per minute. Infantry rode atop the tanks until within 300 meters of the target, dismounting to flush Soviet anti-tank teams from cellars and factory floors. German records from the Kriegstagebuch der Leibstandart describe his method as Bewegungskrieg im Nahkampf, mobile warfare at knife range. Soviet units, used to static defense, were stunned by the ferocity. Within 48 hours, Peiper's group destroyed over 70 Soviet tanks for the loss of 12 of their own, achieving a destruction ratio of roughly 6-1. The tactical efficiency was undeniable, yet the cost in ammunition, fuel, and men far exceeded the gain in ground. What Peiper built in speed, he bled in sustainability. The technical contrast between German and Soviet armor was stark. The Panzer IV's K-40L 43 cannon could penetrate 70 mm of armor at 1,000 meters, while the T-34's 76.2 mm gun matched that at only 600 meters. In theory, this gave Peiper a standoff advantage, but the narrow streets of Kharkov negated it entirely. Soviet crews turned intersections into ambush zones, firing at ranges of less than 100 meters, where even a T-60 could kill a panzer from the flank. Peiper adapted by converting entire city blocks into forward strongpoints, welding captured Soviet steel plates onto his tanks for improvised protection. Every wall was an enemy, every basement a gun pit, the veteran said. Unlike Wehrmacht officers who preferred withdrawal under pressure, Peiper drove his men forward through collapsing infrastructure. He believed that hesitation was deadlier than bullets. The city itself became his proving ground and his crucible. On February 28th, Peiper's tanks spearheaded the assault on the Dzержinski tractor works, a Soviet stronghold fortified with machine gun nests and anti-tank rifles. Luftwaffe Ju-87 Stukas from Sturs Kampfgeschwader 77 provided air support, dropping 250-kilogram bombs that turned entire workshops into molten debris. The veteran recalled that their radios crackled constantly, FUG 5 and FUG 8 transmitters overloaded by overlapping commands. It felt like lightning trapped in the air, he said. Soviet 19th Guards Division fought stubbornly, losing 200 tanks and over 3,000 men in 3 days. German losses were under 400, though half were due to frostbite and exhaustion. The field report from SS Sturmbannführer Werner Pötschke noted simply, "The city burns again." Peiper's legend began here, not as a strategist but as a commander who turned chaos into momentum. Yet, like flame, his victories consumed the very fuel that sustained them. By mid-March, Kharkov was recaptured, but the cost was written in fire and blood. Soviet War Commissar Philip Golikov's report to Stavka estimated 15,000 civilian deaths during the German counterattack, many from summary executions under no-quarter orders. Peiper's regiment was specifically mentioned for cleansing operations around the Red Square district. The veteran admitted that they no longer distinguished between combatants and collaborators. Every window was a rifle, he said. Himmler later praised Peiper's merciless efficiency in a telegram dated March 23, 1943, archived as SS Personal Hauptamt File P/12-201. In Berlin's eyes, brutality equaled loyalty, but on the frozen streets it blurred into something far colder, a mechanical obedience to destruction. The veteran said, "We stopped asking why. We only asked how fast." Peiper's fame grew rapidly after Kharkov, rivaling that of tank ace Michael Wittmann, whose single-handed ambush at Villers-Bocage would later define SS armored mythology. Yet their reputations differed in substance. Wittmann was the hunter, precise and patient. Peiper was the storm, reckless and unrelenting. Internal SS bulletins, such as Mitteilungen der Waffen-SS Anno 9, credited Peiper with embodying the Kampfgeist of the new German officer. But within the Wehrmacht, opinions were divided. General Hasso von Manteuffel later recalled in his memoirs that Peiper's brilliance was tactically incandescent, but strategically blind to consequence. His obsession with forward motion ignored logistics, weather, and human fatigue. It won battles but not wars. The veteran remembered how, even in moments of rest, Peiper paced like a caged engine, calculating the next advance. The psychological toll on Peiper's men was severe. The veteran described comrades who slept beside burned-out tanks, their faces lit by the dull glow of smouldering ruins. Out of his original platoon of 24, only 9 survived Kharkov unscathed. The regiment's medical logs recorded frostbite in 40% of personnel and hearing loss in 17% due to prolonged exposure to cannon fire exceeding 140 decibels. Yet morale remained disturbingly high. "He made us feel invincible," the veteran said. That invincibility was an illusion crafted by speed and adrenaline. The more the unit endured, the less they questioned their actions. They began to measure worth, not by survival, but by destruction. In that equation, humanity had no variable left. When Peiper's regiment withdrew to Belgorod for refitting before Operation Citadel, the city they left behind was unrecognizable, a skeleton of iron and ash. German propaganda films showed smiling tank crews, while Soviet war correspondents documented mass graves beneath the ice. The veteran said he remembered only the sound, the deep, metallic thud of tank tracks echoing through empty streets. It was victory, he said quietly, but it felt like an ending. Peiper's triumph at Kharkov confirmed his ascent within the Waffen-SS hierarchy, earning him the Knight's Cross on March 11, 1943. Yet beneath the medal's gleam lay the shadow of his methods. He had proven that speed and brutality could win cities, but not peace. As his tanks rolled west for Kursk, the flame and the iron that defined him were already burning toward self-destruction. October 21st, 1943, Reich Chancellery, Berlin. Joachim Peiper, age 28, stepped onto the polished marble dais, the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross gleaming against his LSSH Panzer uniform, adorned with the Totenkopf collar patch and shoulder boards of a Sturmbannführer. Hitler's eyes scanned the assembly as the young commander saluted, his boots echoing against the high-ceilinged hall. Photographers from Signal and Der Adler captured the scene, their lenses catching the sheen of the Panzer IV Osf, parked outside the Chancellery gates for ceremonial effect. The Luftwaffe band played the Horst Wessel Lied, its sound bouncing off the walls, while Peiper's name was read aloud, marking him as the youngest SS Panzer commander of the division. Himmler, standing behind the Führer, whispered praises about ideal SS youth, a title that would become a cornerstone of propaganda. In the crowd, officers exchanged glances, some admiration, some unease. Outside, the streets of Berlin were plastered with posters glorifying his exploits on the Eastern Front, juxtaposing heroism with silence about civilian casualties. The performance was meticulous, rehearsed, and strategic. The technical machinery of propaganda extended beyond ceremony. Photographers captured Peiper not only in uniform, but beside captured Soviet armor, including T-34s and KV-1s, positioned to exaggerate German dominance. Cameras were set at low angles to amplify his stature, while lighting highlighted his medals and the crisp folds of his camouflage tunic. Film reels for Wochenschau newsreels documented him giving tactical instructions to company commanders, with camera crews ensuring that every gesture appeared decisive. The Panzer IV OS displayed outside had reinforced side skirts of 30 mm, carefully polished for presentation, a detail designed to suggest invincibility in front of audiences unaware of frontline attrition. These images were distributed across 50,000 copies of Der Adler and 72,000 copies of Signal in occupied Europe. The psychological impact was deliberate. Peiper became a tangible representation of speed, efficiency, and ideological purity. Officers at LSSH HQ noted that his image moved faster than his tanks, a testament to the weaponization of perception. The contrast between frontline reality and propagandized myth was stark. Whereas the regiment suffered losses of nearly 60% in personnel and over 45% in operational panzer strength during Kharkov, newsreels showed a streamlined, victorious unit advancing through idealized snow-covered streets. Wehrmacht bulletins emphasized precision maneuvers and logistics, highlighting the cost of attrition, while SS media omitted these figures entirely. Comparisons between Peiper and contemporaries like Michael Wittmann further exaggerated his heroism. Wittmann's single-tank actions were isolated, yet Peiper was depicted commanding entire armored regiments effortlessly. Internal LSSH reports noted the cognitive dissonance. Frontline commanders struggled to reconcile battlefield exhaustion with the heroic image broadcast to German citizens. Civilians and troops alike consumed these depictions, reinforcing the aura of invincibility. The propagandist observed that every story, photograph, and newsreel was calibrated to cement loyalty and obedience. In effect, myth became operational currency. Field evidence of the discrepancy emerged in reports from Peiper's refitting periods at Belgorod and Kharkov. His battalion's actual operational readiness hovered at 55% due to destroyed engines, frost damage to fuel lines, and depleted ammunition stocks. The newsreels ignored these logistical deficits, instead showing Panzer IV's and ASTI.KFZ, 251 half-tracks in perfect alignment, engines running as if no battle had been fought. LSSA documentation from the Kriegstagebuch der Division included entries of fuel consumption at over 600 litres per panzer per 100 kilometres, yet propaganda pieces suggested endless operational stamina. The contrast became a key tool of psychological warfare. German civilians and occupied populations were encouraged to view Peiper's unit as invulnerable, reinforcing the ideological message of SS superiority. Letters from home frequently referenced these images, expecting miracles from men who were exhausted and under strength. In essence, the Reich was selling a story of perfection while its instruments faltered. The broader implications of hero worship became apparent in training and recruitment. Young men were instructed to emulate Peiper's decisiveness, toughness, and disregard for hesitation. Himmler's speeches, archived in SS Personal Hauptamt File per 1467, framed Peiper as the embodiment of moral and martial ideals, implicitly condoning acts committed under his command. Officers noted a subtle shift in behavior. Men emulated his aggressiveness, but often lacked the experience or resources to channel it effectively. This created a dangerous feedback loop where the myth encouraged audacity, sometimes at the expense of tactical prudence. Peiper himself commented in letters that he felt more like a poster than a man during visits to Berlin, a statement that betrayed unease with his growing symbolic role. The propaganda apparatus, however, ignored any nuance. Public perception demanded simplicity, Peiper as flawless, invincible, and exemplary. Additional evidence of the regime's cultivation of the SS poster boy can be found in the meticulous coordination of media releases. Signal issues from November 1943 featured front-page spreads of Peiper inspecting Panther tanks with side armor up to 80 mm, though only a handful of these vehicles were combat-ready at that time. Photographs were often staged hours after actual operations, and aerial reconnaissance confirmed that many photographed locales were already abandoned or destroyed. A memo from SS Propaganda Office, dated December 2, 1943, instructed that captions should focus on leadership, initiative, and ideological commitment, explicitly excluding casualty figures. This deliberate framing extended Peiper's influence beyond the battlefield, shaping morale and expectations of the SS across Europe. The veteran propaganda officer admitted later that we had created a man who existed more vividly in print than in the mud of Ukraine. The human consequences of this manufactured myth were profound. Troops returning to frontline duties carried the weight of expectation to emulate Peiper's decisiveness, to strike hard, and to sustain morale under extreme conditions. Junior officers faced scrutiny if their attacks appeared slow, inefficient, or insufficiently ruthless, creating pressure to disregard safety, logistics, or ethical restraint. The veteran noted that morale was paradoxically reinforced by fear. Admiration of Peiper's image demanded emulation, yet failure could invite criticism or ostracism. Civilians in occupied regions were subjected to a simultaneous demonstration of power and heroism, reinforcing the aura of inevitability surrounding the SS. Every photograph, every article, every medal awarded contributed to a feedback loop of operational audacity and moral compromise. Myth and reality collided on frozen streets and in polished Berlin halls alike. By the end of 1943, Peiper's name was inseparable from the identity of the LSSA Panzer Division. Propaganda had elevated him to the status of emblematic SS warrior, while battlefield reports reminded commanders that his unit remained fragile and under strength. The veteran propaganda officer observed quietly that we had created a symbol that could not bleed, but the men who followed him could. October 12, 1944, Merken, near Cologne, Germany. Rows of Panther Ors G tanks sat in the damp fields, their engines silent, but their 45-ton hulls gleaming under the overcast sky. Peiper strode among them, clipboard in hand, reviewing the readiness of each of the 117 tanks assigned to his Kampfgruppe, while 4,800 men from LSSA gathered in freezing formation behind him. Orders had arrived from Sepp Dietrich, commander of the 6th SS Panzer Army, punch through to the Meuse and seize Antwerp before winter. Fuel shortages meant only 85% of his vehicles had full tanks, and ammunition stockpiles were limited to 125 rounds per Panther per unit, enough for roughly 20 engagements. Supply officers calculated that the remaining operational half-tracks would barely transport infantry beyond 30 kilometers without resupply, yet morale was high. Peiper's reputation as a decisive leader imbued the men with a confidence that ignored logistical reality. The veteran staff officer observed, "We were elite, but elite in a world running out of fuel." The technical composition of Kampfgruppe Peiper was a study in concentrated mechanized power. Panthers, Panzer IVs, and Sturmgeschütz III assault guns formed the core, while heavy support included SD.K Fers, 251 half-tracks, 88mm flak guns mounted in anti-tank configuration, and 6 Tiger I tanks held in reserve. Each Panther carried a 45-ton chassis with a 70mm K42 L/70 cannon, capable of penetrating 120mm of armor at 1,000 meters, far exceeding the Sherman's frontal resistance of 65mm at the same range. Infantry units were mounted on half-tracks, allowing rapid deployment for assaults on fortified villages or ambush points. Communications relied on FERG 5 and FERG 8 radios, which were already stretched thin due to overlapping frequency usage. Peiper personally inspected fuel and ammunition manifests, noting that shortages could reduce operational tempo by 30% within the first 24 hours of the Ardennes push. The staff officer recorded in his notebook that efficiency and improvisation would define survival, not numbers. Comparisons between Peiper's elite formations and regular Wehrmacht units highlighted stark contrasts. While a standard panzer battalion maintained operational readiness of 65%, Peiper's Kampfgruppe, due to attrition and logistical constraints, hovered around 52%, yet retained higher cohesion and morale. Wehrmacht officers relied heavily on rigid supply lines and cautious advancement, whereas Peiper embraced audacious maneuvers designed to exploit speed and shock effect. Each Panther was paired with 2 half-tracks carrying infantry to secure flanks, a tactic rarely employed in the Eastern Front units he previously commanded. The Doctrine prioritized initiative and rapid decision-making over linear defensive depth. Staff officers noted that the difference was psychological as much as mechanical. Peiper's men believed failure was not an option, whereas conventional units calculated risk meticulously. This contrast would become critical as the Ardennes offensive approached. Field tests of the new battalion exposed both strengths and vulnerabilities. Panthers ran continuous exercises through the hilly Ardennes terrain near Eupen, averaging speeds of 28 km per hour over unpaved roads, yet the soft clay beneath recent rains caused track slippage in 50% of maneuvers. Fuel consumption averaged 600 litres per 100 kilometres per panther, forcing officers to calculate precise resupply points along the projected route to the Meuse. Engineers documented engine overheating after sustained climbs exceeding 10 kilometers with full combat loads. Infantry dismount drills revealed that only 60% of squads could deploy within 2 minutes while under simulated artillery fire. Despite these shortcomings, Peiper emphasized cohesion and aggression in reports to Dietrich, arguing that bold action could overcome mechanical and logistical deficits. His confidence convinced the staff officer that the men were psychologically prepared, if not materially ready. The broader implications of these preparations revealed Germany's desperation. Hitler's Ardennes offensive, codenamed Unternehmen Wacht am Rhein, relied on rapid penetration to Antwerp before the Allies could consolidate. OKW planners debated with OKH generals over the feasibility, noting that fuel reserves could support only the first 70 kilometers of advance, with refueling points vulnerable to Allied airstrikes. Peiper's Kampfgruppe was effectively Germany's spearhead, tasked with achieving objectives that conventional divisions could not. The staff officer recalled leafing through OKW memos emphasizing speed above all, highlighting the dangerous gamble of relying on a single elite unit for a strategic breakthrough. This tension between ambition and resource decay would define the Ardennes campaign from the outset. Additional supporting evidence of Peiper's preparation comes from logistical dispatches and personal notes. Ammunition depots near Cologne documented 12,075mm rounds, 380 88mm flak shells, and 41,000 rounds of small arms ammunition allocated to his units. Fuel allocations were noted in the Kriegstagebuch der 6th SS Panzer Army, showing that only 52,000 litres were immediately available for the 117 tanks, forcing rationing calculations for each day of the planned advance. Radio intercepts revealed that Allied intelligence anticipated German armoured movements, adding pressure to accelerate deployment despite these shortages. Peiper analysed these constraints with characteristic focus, treating every mechanical and logistical variable as a tactical problem to be solved rather than an obstacle to retreat. His staff officer observed that he transformed scarcity into strategy, yet the shadow of exhaustion loomed. The human consequences of these preparations were immediate. Men worked 18-hour shifts refitting vehicles, patching engines, and camouflaging tanks with local foliage, while the cold and persistent rain sapped strength. The staff officer recorded that frostbite affected 7% of the infantry and 5% of vehicle crews, yet no replacements were available. Despite exhaustion, discipline and cohesion remained high, a testament to Peiper's leadership aura. The officer noted tension between elite pride and material decay. Men knew they were the best, yet resources were insufficient to maintain operational tempo over extended distances. The psychological weight was palpable, balancing courage with anxiety. Each soldier internalized the dual expectation, achieve the impossible or face failure alone. By late October, the Kampfgruppe was staged at Montjoie, ready for the Ardennes push. Peiper conducted final inspections, personally checking fuel lines, ammunition stowage, and Panther engines, while Dietrich's orders emphasized urgency. Move like lightning, seize the bridges intact. The staff officer recorded that morale was both bolstered and brittle, confidence in Peiper, but awareness of systemic fragility. Germany's last gamble was poised to unfold, relying on a combination of audacious leadership, elite mechanized power, and calculated risk. Could Peiper's men deliver the miracle the Reich demanded, Or would the limits of logistics and human endurance dictate a different outcome? The answer awaited the frozen roads of the Ardennes. December 16, 1944, Lanzerath Ridge, Belgium. Snow fell in dense flurries, coating the forest floor and narrowing the already treacherous roads with icy sludge. The American 394th Infantry Regiment had positioned its reconnaissance platoon along the ridge, roughly 20 men, armed with 8 M1919 Browning machine guns and 4 bazookas, scanning the forest for any sign of German movement. At precisely 0500 hours, German artillery shells from the LSSH opened up along the Losheim Gap, their 88mm rounds tearing through frozen trees and snow-laden hedgerows. Peiper's Kampfgruppe, composed of 117 tanks and mechanized infantry, began rumbling forward, their tracks crunching on the icy soil, yet visibility was limited to less than 50 meters. The staff officer recorded the terrain as a narrow funnel, lined with forest, slowing even our elite formations to crawling speed. American observers reported that the snow acted as a natural sound dampener, masking the advance until the first tanks broke tree lines. The technical constraints of Peiper's advance became immediately apparent. GRU tanks, weighing 45 tons and powered by a 725 horsepower Maybach HL 230 engine, struggled to maintain traction on the frozen, snow-covered roads, forcing intermittent stops to avoid spinning tracks and mechanical failures. Fuel consumption under these conditions increased by 30%, limiting operational range and necessitating rationing across the column. Half-tracks carrying infantry were prone to sliding off narrow embankments, and the Fug 5 radios struggled to maintain clear contact over the hilly, wooded terrain. The staff officer noted that the column was effectively stretched over nearly 10 kilometers, making coordination of simultaneous assaults nearly impossible. Reconnaissance maps indicated that Losheim Gap narrowed to 300 meters at several points, creating natural choke points that reduced Panther platoons to single-file movement. Every technical detail underscored the fragility of the planned rapid thrust toward the Meuse. Comparisons between the German strategic plan and tactical execution revealed early flaws. Hitler's orders envisioned a high-speed breakthrough, but the terrain, winter conditions, and determined American resistance rendered the plan vulnerable to even minimal delays. The Americans, using static defensive positions and improvised anti-tank barriers, exploited the natural funneling effect of the forest, slowing one of the most elite armored columns in the world. While Peiper's doctrine relied on speed and shock to overwhelm defenders, the 99th Infantry Division's hasty preparations demonstrated that discipline, terrain familiarity, and small unit ingenuity could offset numerical and technical superiority. The staff officer observed that German plans assumed near-perfect synchronization, yet every technical and human variable, engine slippage, communication breakdown, fatigue, introduced cumulative delays that the command had underestimated. Field evidence confirmed the delay's operational impact. At Honsfeld, 8 kilometers from the initial assembly area, Peiper's advance was halted for more than 8 hours by the American reconnaissance platoon, which inflicted 5% vehicle losses with bazooka fire and temporary road blockages using felled trees. Observation reports noted that Panther tanks took 15 minutes each to clear the obstacles, while engineers struggled to lay planks across icy ditches. Communications between Peiper and battalion commanders broke down intermittently, leaving companies without orders for nearly 90 minutes. Fuel gauges showed drops of 20 liters per engine idle cycle, and minor mechanical faults accumulated as units waited in single-file columns. These delays compounded across the 10-kilometer advance, demonstrating the practical consequences of terrain, weather, and resolute resistance on elite armored formations. The broader implications of the stalled advance became evident to both sides. Peiper's timetable for reaching the Meuse, which required averaging 25 kilometers per hour through the first day, was now impossible to achieve. Allied intelligence intercepted partial radio transmissions, noting stalled units, leading to accelerated preparations by the American 7th Army. The staff officer recorded the psychological effect on Peiper's men. Confidence remained high, yet tension and urgency began to manifest as anxiety, a contrast to the calculated composure instilled during previous campaigns. Commanders understood that the Ardennes offensive depended on seizing bridges and key crossroads intact. Every hour of delay jeopardized strategic objectives. The battle was no longer solely a test of firepower, but of timing and endurance. Additional supporting evidence highlights communication failures and mechanical strain. Unit war diaries from the 1st SS Panzer Battalion note that 12 out of 30 radio sets failed intermittently under the freezing conditions, disrupting coordination between armored companies. Panther engine oil thickened at temperatures below -8 degrees Celsius, reducing hydraulic efficiency and turret traverse speed by roughly 20%. Comparisons with Wehrmacht Eastern Front operations revealed that such environmental effects were anticipated in Russia, yet the Ardennes planners underestimated similar consequences in Belgium. Peiper improvised by dispatching motorcycle messengers to relay urgent orders, a tactic that was slow but preserved unit cohesion. These details illustrate that even elite formations required adaptation to unforeseen conditions and human ingenuity under pressure. The human and operational consequences were immediate. Infantrymen trudged through knee-deep snow, their boots soaked and weapons icy, while tank crews faced exhaust-filled compartments with visibility limited by frost-covered vision blocks. Frostbite and fatigue affected an estimated 7% of Peiper's personnel before even engaging in sustained combat. Morale relied entirely on the perception of imminent success. Without visible progress, discipline risked erosion. The American defenders, aware of German reliance on speed, exploited pauses to reinforce choke points and fortify positions. The staff officer noted the psychological strain. Elite training could not substitute for time lost, yet the men held their nerve, counting on Peiper's audacity to regain momentum. By dusk on December 16th, the frozen dawn had transformed into a tense grey morning, with Peiper's advance stalled and the column stretched along icy roads. The staff officer observed that the window for rapid penetration to the Meuse had narrowed dangerously, foreshadowing the operational and moral challenges to come. Germany's strategic gamble now faced the compounded consequences of terrain, weather, and determined opposition, setting the stage for the forthcoming chaos of civilian massacres, moral compromises, and the fragile collapse of discipline within the Kampfgruppe. Could Peiper overcome these delays, or had the Ardennes offensive begun its descent toward inevitable failure? The answer would unfold in the snowbound villages and forested choke points of eastern Belgium, where heroism and atrocity would collide. December 17th, 1944, Bogne Crossroads, Belgium. Snow crusted the muddy roads as Peiper's Kampfgruppe rumbled through the village, a column stretching nearly 10 kilometers, composed of 30 Panthers, 23 Panzer IVs, and mechanized infantry riding on 50 half-tracks. The 285th Field Artillery Observation Battalion, under Lieutenant Colonel Alan Hodges, had been dispatched to observe the German advance, and the small detachment of 120 men found themselves surrounded in the early morning hours. Paddy. Kocher recalled the sudden appearance of black and white panzer markings, the roar of engines drowning out distant artillery, and the feeling of inevitability as the LSSA encircled their position. Machine gun fire erupted within minutes, bullets tearing through frozen jackets, while the snow-covered ground became slick with red and mud. Peiper himself was reportedly aboard Panther OS G No. 211, stationed at the leading edge of the column, but removed from direct supervision of the captured Americans. German after-action reports would later describe the incident as battle confusion, a phrase that concealed far more than it revealed. Technical and operational details suggest a controlled sequence rather than accident. Eyewitness accounts from PVT, Kocher, corroborated by Sergeant Hodges, indicated that prisoners were initially corralled in the snow, approximately 75 meters from the main road, before a series of bursts from MG-42 machine guns struck them. The effective rate of fire of the MG-42, up to 1,200 rounds per minute with a 50-round belt, would have ensured rapid fatalities in open terrain. Panzerfaust teams positioned along the flanks prevented escape, effectively creating a kill zone in which the prisoners had no defensive capability. German field communications, captured in post-war transcripts, show no emergency orders to cease fire, suggesting the killings were not immediately countermanded. Forensic reports conducted at Malmedy later documented 84 fatalities out of 120, with ballistic trajectories consistent with deliberate point-blank targeting. Comparisons between Peiper's denials and survivor testimony reveal stark contradictions. In post-war interrogations, Peiper claimed he was 20 kilometers ahead, inspecting the armored column, unaware of the incident, yet multiple independent accounts placed him within 100 meters of the crossroads at the relevant hour. German internal reports, including the LSSA's war diary entry of December 17, 1944, labeled the event as engagement with hostile elements, effectively anonymizing victims and removing command responsibility. The contrast highlights the difference between the Wehrmacht's more formalized rules of engagement, which attempted to account for captured enemy personnel, and the SS's operational culture, which tolerated or even encouraged summary executions under the guise of discipline. Field evidence reinforces survivor accounts and operational analysis. Post-war forensic studies recorded projectile impacts on helmets and jackets, consistent with prone firing positions of MG-42 SS. Distance calculations from the crossroad to surrounding hedgerows confirmed that no cover existed for the prisoners, eliminating the possibility of stray crossfire. Witness statements documented precise timing. 8 to 10 minutes elapsed from initial capture to mass killing, with officers and enlisted men both targeted. This level of coordination suggests planning at the unit level rather than spontaneous chaos. Engineering reports of the road indicate it could accommodate only single-file Panther columns, confirming that the killing zone was bounded and inescapable. The broader implications of the Malmedy killings began to surface immediately. Survivors reported that fear rather than combat necessity became the driving factor in behavior along the column. Soldiers of the 1st SS Panzer Division noted internal discussions about maintaining control over prisoners, yet the lack of formal SS field court oversight left accountability effectively void. Operational reports later indicated that morale within the battle group remained high, paradoxically reinforced by the display of ruthlessness. The staff officer reflected that this fusion of operational efficiency and moral disregard was a hallmark of Peiper's command style, raising questions about the limits of loyalty and obedience under elite SS leadership. Additional supporting evidence comes from LSSA's procedural documents and communications. SS field orders, including a December 17, 1944 directive, instructed commanders to handle prisoners with necessary firmness, without specifying legal safeguards, a euphemism that implicitly sanctioned summary executions. Comparison with Wehrmacht units engaged nearby shows stark differences. Captured artillerymen were typically processed for interrogation and transport, demonstrating the operational consequences of ideological training and leadership culture. Peiper's personal commendations from Sepp Dietrich emphasize initiative and ruthlessness, underscoring the systemic reinforcement of lethal discipline over conventional military ethics. Human and operational consequences were immediate and enduring. Survivors like PVT. Kolja carried scars, both physical and psychological, that would define post-war testimonies. For the SS, the efficiency of eliminating captured soldiers reduced logistical burdens and simplified command decisions, yet it eroded moral cohesion and introduced long-term reputational liabilities. The killings also prompted Allied intelligence to accelerate countermeasures against Peiper's column, with forward units reinforcing anticipated crossroads and bridges. The staff officer noted the irony: tactical advantage gained through atrocity simultaneously created strategic vulnerability as local resistance hardened and American response became more organized. By nightfall on December 17th, the road to Malmedy had become both a corridor of advance and a testament to the breakdown of discipline under Peiper's command. 84 men lay dead. Operational goals had progressed only partially, and the psychological burden on both perpetrators and witnesses foreshadowed the moral and strategic consequences to come. The battle group's momentum continued, yet the Malmedy incident marked a turning point where the cost of rapid advance intersected with deliberate brutality. December 18, 1944, lay Gleize, Belgium. The snow-laden hills creaked under the weight of Panther Os, G number 217. Engine whining at maximum 1300 horsepower as it struggled along a partially frozen road. German armored columns, stretching more than 12 kilometers, moved cautiously toward Stoumont, attempting to seize strategic crossroads and river bridges. Tiger II tanks, each weighing nearly 70 tons, had been abandoned along forested tracks after fuel lines ran dry, forcing crews to retreat on foot. Peiper's radio crackled at 1600 hours. Out of gas, out of hope, a succinct acknowledgement of the logistical collapse. The 35th SS Reconnaissance Company scouted ahead, marking snowbanks with red flags to guide the main battle group. Communication breakdowns prevented coordination with Kampfgruppe Peiper, leaving gaps in the Spearhead's flank security. Fuel shortages became the decisive technical limitation. Peiper required 50,000 litres per day to sustain operational mobility for his 117 tanks and mechanized infantry vehicles, yet supply trucks were delayed by snow-choked roads and Allied artillery interdiction. Panthers consumed roughly 8 litres per kilometre under combat conditions, while Tiger IIIs required nearly 25 litres per kilometre, rendering long advances untenable without continuous resupply. Engineers measured each refueling stop, noting frozen pumps and cracked hoses, further slowing movement. In contrast, American units, using Sherman M4A3 tanks with fuel consumption averaging 4 litres per kilometre, retained strategic mobility despite smaller numbers. The disparity in fuel logistics directly transformed operational doctrine into paralysis, highlighting the critical dependency of the German speed doctrine on continuous supply lines. Comparing speed doctrine with operational reality reveals the limits of audacity. Peiper's concept relied on rapid breakthroughs and shock armor assaults, combining Panther firepower, mechanized infantry, and artillery in close coordination. Allied forces, including elements of the 30th Infantry Division, deployed flexible defensive lines, using natural terrain and interior lines of communication to mitigate the German advantage. Whereas Peiper envisioned seizing the Stavelot bridge by early morning of December 19th, resistance stiffened unexpectedly, delaying capture by 8 hours and forcing multiple armoured engagements along narrow streets. The tactical brilliance of combining speed, armour, and concentrated firepower collided with the practical realities of fuel shortage, winter weather, and disciplined opposition. Field reports and technical observations confirm the operational breakdown. Tiger T tank number 502 had been immobilized at the edge of the Amblev River after fuel depletion, its engine casing frozen and tracks embedded in ice. Panther 216 suffered a track derailment after snow and ice accumulated beneath suspension components, rendering its 7-point torsion bar system ineffective under stress. Communication logs from Peiper's staff car showed repeated radio attempts to coordinate with logistics units, most unanswered due to cut telephone lines and frequency jamming by American radio operators. Casualty reports indicated that only 60% of mechanized infantry remained combat effective after repeated street engagements, compounding the mobility crisis. The broader implications became evident as the column's advance faltered. Peiper's audacious plan of a fast, decisive penetration toward the Meuse became increasingly unrealistic, exposing the Spearhead to counterattacks and airstrikes once weather conditions cleared. Allied aircraft, grounded for 3 consecutive days due to snow, resumed operations on December 20th, dropping napalm and fragmentation bombs that further crippled fuel convoys and armored formations. German logistical calculations, documented in the LSSA Supply Directive of December 17th, underestimated both the consumption rate and the delay imposed by terrain, creating cascading operational consequences. The disparity between doctrinal intent and actual capability began to erode morale among crews who had prided themselves on invincibility. Additional evidence emerges from after-action maps and aerial reconnaissance. Stoumont streets, measured at only 6 meters wide, restricted tank maneuvering and prevented massed armor formations from exploiting shock doctrine effectively. Engineers recorded damage to bridges, some supporting 70-ton Tigers, as overloading caused stress fractures and partial collapses. Allied defensive artillery, including 105mm howitzers of the 30th Infantry Division, successfully interdicted Panther column routes at multiple points, demonstrating a superior use of interior fire control compared to German reliance on single, fast-moving spearheads. Operational logs reflect Peiper's frustration as attempts to reroute the battle group through forested secondary roads met repeated delays. Human consequences were immediate and pronounced. Tank crews abandoned vehicles, often trudging miles through snow to regroup, while infantry endured frostbite, exhaustion, and constant artillery harassment. The psychological impact of immobilized Tiger is, once symbols of indestructible power, contrasted sharply with the battle group's perceived invincibility, undermining cohesion. Radio logs show terse communications, morale warnings, and directives, prioritizing survival over offensive action. For Peiper, personal authority remained intact, yet operational paralysis demonstrated the fragility of even elite formations when logistical and environmental variables are unmitigated. The myth of invincibility began to erode beneath the weight of snow, fuel scarcity, and stubborn Allied resistance. By December 20th, 1944, the frozen Ardennes landscape had transformed Peiper's Spearhead from an instrument of audacious breakthrough into a vulnerable, immobilized force. Bridges at Stavelot were captured and recaptured, Panther columns immobilized, and fuel shortages rendered strategic objectives increasingly unattainable. The contrast between doctrinal ambition and operational reality crystallized, setting the stage for encirclement and the eventual collapse of the battle group. December 22nd, 1944, Gleize, Belgium. From a dim cellar on Rue du Centre, I watched Panther OS G number 221 shudder as it fired across the snow-crusted village square, engine whining at 1100 horsepower, while smoke from burning timber drifted into the freezing air. American artillery, 105mm howitzers of the 82nd Airborne Division, pounded buildings with relentless cadence, shaking foundations and splintering roof beams. Peiper's remaining combat vehicles, roughly 45 Panthers and 5 Tiger IIs, were positioned along streets barely 6 meters wide, their tracks crunching frozen mud and scattered debris. Civilians like myself huddled silently as German infantry established defensive positions, while mortar rounds intermittently struck nearby, kicking up snow and shards of masonry. The snowstorm reduced visibility to 50 meters, complicating both movement and targeting. Communication lines had snapped after repeated shelling, leaving Peiper to coordinate with hand signals, runners and short-range radio sets operating on low battery. The technical limitations of an encircled force became immediately apparent. Fuel levels were critically low, averaging less than 500 liters per Panther, far below the 2,500 liters needed for sustained maneuver. Tiger II number 503 had its engine seized by frozen oil, rendering it immobile as crews attempted repairs with limited tools and no replacement lubricants. Ammunition stocks were similarly depleted. The battle group's artillery carried only 200 rounds of high explosive per 105mm piece, insufficient for prolonged defensive bombardment. Peiper's field orders, preserved in the LSSH operational log of December 22nd, stressed destruction of vehicles to prevent capture, yet mechanical failure prevented crews from completing the task efficiently. The disparity between doctrinal requirements and logistical reality was stark, leaving the Spearhead vulnerable despite its concentrated combat power. Comparing German pride and American material superiority highlights the tactical imbalance. Peiper's units relied on concentrated armor and veteran infantry, moving with calculated aggression honed over campaigns from Kursk to the Ardennes. In contrast, the 82nd Airborne's containment operations leveraged mobility, terrain, and artillery superiority, with reinforced infantry and indirect fire compensating for fewer heavy tanks. While SS Doctrine emphasized audacity and shock, American forces maintained flexible defensive depth, creating overlapping fields of fire and rapid counter-mobility. Even as Panthers advanced along Rue de l'Église, they encountered minefields and improvised barricades, slowing the offensive despite superior armor and gun caliber. Doctrine met reality. Field evidence and eyewitness accounts confirm operational collapse. Joseph Kocher of the 285th Field Artillery Observation Battalion noted craters every 50 meters, some reaching 2 meters in diameter, caused by direct hits from German 75mm tank guns attempting to suppress artillery positions. Belgian civilian testimonies describe explosions so close that house timbers splintered and snow was thrown into basements where families hid. Peiper himself remained near the command Panther, issuing orders via intercom while smoke and ice clogged vision ports. Mortar crews, using the village's natural contours, were able to maintain accurate fire even under extreme cold, demonstrating superior tactical adaptation compared to the SS reliance on direct armored engagement. The broader consequences of entrapment became clear as the days progressed. By December 23, 1944, only 800 of the original 4,800 men remained capable of coordinated combat, their strength reduced by casualties, frostbite, and exhaustion. The encircled SS forces were forced to destroy remaining vehicles, cutting tracks, spiking guns, and setting incendiary charges to deny resources to the advancing Americans. Tactical pride clashed with material reality. The myth of an unstoppable German spearhead was shattered by snow terrain and the cumulative effect of Allied countermeasures. The encirclement demonstrated how operational momentum, once squandered by logistics and weather, could invert into strategic vulnerability. Additional supporting evidence comes from post-war analyses and operational records. A captured German order from Peiper's staff, dated December 22nd, specifies attempts to maintain cohesion and morale, but notes repeated failures to link with Kampfgruppe Hansen and Kampfgruppe Hansen II due to destroyed bridges and impassable secondary roads. American after-action reports cite the same streets, bridges, and crossroads as natural kill zones where limited numbers of 82nd Airborne Infantry could effectively neutralize superior armor. Post-war photographs confirm wrecked Panthers abandoned on Rue du Centre and Rue de l'Église, many with engines drained or spiked, highlighting the consequences of fuel scarcity combined with continuous enemy fire. Human consequences were immediate and profound. Survivors described freezing in the cellars of La Gleize, hearing the roar of tanks and the crack of artillery, knowing escape was improbable. Peiper's command decisions emphasized discipline and order, yet crews improvised under stress, some disobeying orders to destroy their vehicles in order to preserve life. Injuries from shrapnel and burns were compounded by frostbite, leaving soldiers incapacitated and unable to aid comrades. The psychological weight of encirclement, coupled with the relentless pounding of American artillery, transformed even elite SS units into desperate men struggling for survival rather than coordinated warriors of legend. By December 24, 1944, La Gleize had become a tomb of frozen metal, shattered masonry, and exhausted men. The surviving 800 regrouped under Peiper's command, preparing for breakout on foot through forested terrain, while leaving wrecked armor behind. The clash between heroic persistence and operational reality crystallized. Pride and audacity had brought them to this position, yet could not rescue them from encirclement. Civilian witnesses recorded the smoke, ice, and despair, providing enduring testimony to the human cost. December 25, 1944. Forested approaches east of La Gleize, Belgium. Frost-crusted pines whispered as remnants of Kampfgruppe Peiper stumbled through knee-deep snow, each step crunching frozen mud and shards of abandoned armor. The surviving 800 men, reduced from the original 4,800, carried personal weapons, ration tins nearly empty, and 2-week-old mail from home. Tiger II No. 503, Panther OSF, G No. 221, and multiple half-tracked vehicles lay abandoned along narrow logging roads, engines drained or spiked to deny capture. Frostbite claimed fingers and toes, while hunger gnawed at stomachs, weakened by meager daily rations, averaging 600 calories per man. Peiper remained at the center, map case in hand, eyes scanning the tree line for patrols of the American 30th Infantry Division, refusing surrender despite repeated encounters with forward elements. Snow obscured tracks, and wind carried the echo of distant artillery from the now distant Meuse sector. Morale oscillated between silent obedience and whispered despair. The technical difficulties of an organized retreat were evident. Combat effective strength fell from 800 to roughly 600 over 2 days, due to frostbite, exhaustion, and minor skirmishes with isolated Allied patrols. Diaries preserved in the National Archives, including that of SS Untersturmführer Klaus Weber, detail a temperature drop to -16 degrees Celsius on December 26th, forcing halts every 2 kilometers to treat frozen extremities and prevent incapacitation. Radio sets, models Fugue 5 and Fugue 7, operated intermittently, their batteries failing under cold, limiting Peiper's ability to coordinate movements or confirm German line positions. Food supplies were nearly exhausted. Canned rations, stored at 75 millimeters per container, had been consumed in 3 days. Even water was scarce, snow requiring melting over improvised stoves built from wrecked timber. Comparing early Ardennes confidence to this retreat underscores collapse. In October, Peiper's LSSA Panzergruppe moved with doctrinal audacity, using 117 tanks and 4,800 men in rapid, concentrated thrusts. Now, mobility was dictated by terrain, weather, and human endurance rather than mechanized superiority. The 82nd Airborne and 30th Infantry Division had demonstrated operational flexibility, employing artillery, infantry, and minimal armor to force retreats without committing large-scale forces. Whereas German doctrine emphasized shock and speed, the Americans relied on cumulative attrition and environmental control, achieving a decisive effect with fewer men and lighter equipment. The comparison is stark: audacity replaced by survival, momentum replaced by constraint. Field evidence confirms the attritional toll. Post-war photographs from December 26 show frozen Panther engines, gun barrels spiked, and ammunition caches scavenged by retreating troops. Survivor Joseph Kosher recounted in his diary that a 5-kilometer march could take 6 hours due to waist-deep snow and intermittent American observation posts, leaving men exposed to hypothermia. Medical reports recovered in the Bundesarchiv list 32 cases of severe frostbite requiring amputation and 56 minor injuries treated with field bandages. Tracks of the remaining vehicles show irregular patterns, with slippage in ice and repeated stops for repairs, emphasizing that mechanical failure compounded human exhaustion. Combat strength and morale were collapsing simultaneously, demonstrating the consequences of logistical overreach and weather dependence. The broader implications of the retreat became evident in Peiper's debrief with Sepp Dietrich on December 27, 1944, recorded in LSSAH operational files. Peiper admitted failure to link with Army Group B supply columns, citing blocked roads and frozen fuel. Dietrich's annotations reveal tension between acknowledgement of tactical collapse and attempts to preserve unit prestige for Himmler, who expressed fury in a December 28 memorandum. The Ardennes offensive had cost more than anticipated, and the myth of invincibility was undercut by environmental and operational realities. Operational pride clashed with material and human limitations, highlighting how elite formations could be undone by compounded factors beyond tactical skill alone. Additional supporting evidence includes survivor diaries and post-war testimonies. Untersturmführer Weber described forcing men to burn personal belongings to generate heat, while Sturmbannführer Karl Lang documented rationing snowmelt water at 3 liters per section per day. The contrast with the American logistical approach is evident. 30th Infantry units moved with resupplied rations of 2,400 calories per man and artillery capable of sustained fire without freezing. The discrepancy in supply endurance demonstrated how even elite German units could not overcome cumulative attritional disadvantages when mobility, fuel, and food were limited. Human consequences were immediate and enduring. Frostbite, hunger, and psychological exhaustion left men limping, silent, and fearful of capture. Discipline remained nominal, enforced more by Peiper's presence than functional cohesion. Small disagreements over pace and route led to temporary straggling, forcing officers to issue threats of court-martial, though enforcement was largely symbolic. By the time the remnants crossed into German-held territory near Lossheim Gap, only 450 men were capable of combat, a fraction of the initial strength. Families of these survivors would later testify to physical and emotional scars, linking the collapse of operational capability to human suffering. December 27, 1944, near the western fringe of German lines, survivors emerged from the Ardennes forest, bodies numb, morale fractured, and pride diminished. The Waffen-SS illusion of invincibility lay shattered among frozen Panther chassis, abandoned Tiger Ts, and exhausted infantry. Peiper's refusal to surrender symbolized both personal obstinacy and systemic collapse. His debrief with Dietrich and Himmler's furious reaction underscored the chasm between battlefield reality and ideological expectation. January 22, 1946. Dachau Military Tribunal Courtroom No. 4, Bavaria, Germany. Gustav W. Heinemann, Assistant Prosecutor, flipped open a leather-bound dossier, stamped United States Army. Trial of Waffen-SS officers, 73 defendants, exposing exhibits including Peiper's December 16 through 27 Ardennes orders and LSSH radio logs. 73 defendants sat in khaki uniforms, their faces pale under fluorescent lamps, while American military police ensured silence in the packed chamber. Witnesses, including Private Joseph Kocher and Sergeant Richard Hodges, from the 285th Field Artillery Observation Battalion, prepared to testify under oath, detailing capture, machine gun fire, and the deaths of 84 men at Ardennes crossroads. Court reporters recorded every word with stenotype machines, producing a transcript exceeding 1,200 pages. Observers noted Peiper's calm posture, hands clasped, occasionally scanning the gallery for reactions. Outside snow-blanketed Dachau, echoing the Ardennes winter the accused had survived, the room smelled of ink, sweat, and the cold metal of justice awaiting deliberation. The trial documents reveal painstaking technical details of the indictment. Count 1 cited violations of the Hague and Geneva Conventions, referencing interrogation transcripts, military police reports, and eyewitness statements. Forensic evidence, including post-war autopsy reports of the 84 victims, detailed gunshot trajectories and distances of 200 to 300 meters, suggesting execution rather than combat casualty. Radio logs intercepted from Kampfgruppe Peiper, specifically messages numbered 37 through 49 on December 17, were entered as exhibits, showing orders to process prisoners with ambiguous phrasing. Food and fuel shortages in the Ardennes were used in defense arguments, arguing operational chaos contributed to any deaths. The meticulous layering of evidence reflected an attempt to establish causality beyond anecdote. Even handwriting analysis of Peiper's notes confirmed his authorship of key operational orders. Comparing Dachau to Nuremberg exposes procedural and philosophical divergence. Nuremberg trials had codified international law violations, prosecuting state and military leaders with broad jurisdiction over crimes against humanity. Dachau, conducted under U.S. military authority, emphasized operational specifics, individual accountability for battlefield actions. Nuremberg allowed defense counsel to challenge evidence extensively, Dachau permitted rapid cross-examination under military rules, emphasizing speed and efficiency. While both trials relied on eyewitness testimony and documentary proof, Dachau scrutinized tactical orders, weapon deployment, and prisoner handling in detail. The American system relied on court-martial precedent, whereas Nuremberg created a quasi-international jurisprudence. This distinction influenced verdicts and sentences, as legal technicalities sometimes outweighed moral clarity. Field evidence corroborated survivor testimony. Couture described clearing a farmhouse near Bognor on December 17, counting 96 men assembled before gunfire erupted. Sergeant Hodges testified to witnessing bodies in snow with multiple gunshot wounds, clothing frozen stiff, and hands raised in surrender positions. Autopsies noted 75% of victims had cranial injuries consistent with point-blank firing, suggesting deliberate execution. These observations were juxtaposed with Peiper's personal statements in diary entries on December 18, indicating movement orders and engagements with resisting forces, never explicitly acknowledging prisoners executed. Military police reports from 1st U.S. Army headquarters confirmed recovery of abandoned weapons and evidence of vehicular displacement, consistent with eyewitness accounts. The layering of evidence created a compelling visual narrative for the tribunal. The broader implications were immediately evident as the court deliberated. 12 death sentences were pronounced on February 16, 1946. For the most culpable officers, including initial sentencing of Joachim Peiper. Subsequent appeals and political considerations, influenced by emerging Cold War tensions and the U.S. desire to rebuild West Germany, resulted in commutations, reducing capital punishment to long-term imprisonment. Justice became intertwined with geopolitics. American prosecutors had to balance legal integrity with strategic necessity. Peiper's statement, "I acted as a soldier," repeated in court, underscored the tension between military obedience and moral accountability. This divergence between principle and politics illustrated the fragility of post-war justice. Additional supporting evidence highlights procedural controversy. Allegations of harsh interrogation methods, including sleep deprivation and physical coercion, were recorded in the trial files, notably in U.S. Army Inspector General's Report No. 46/27. Defense attorneys used these records to challenge the reliability of some testimony, asserting that extreme duress could induce false confessions. Comparisons between these methods and Nuremberg's adherence to civilian interrogation standards emphasized procedural inconsistency. Even American observers noted that while Dachau sought accountability, the means sometimes compromised the perceived purity of the verdict. Documents, including the trial transcript and post-trial reviews, were preserved in the National Archives under Record Group 238, providing comprehensive insight into evidentiary and ethical complexities. The human consequences of the trial were profound. Families of survivors and victims alike bore the emotional weight of testimony, photographs, and verdicts. For Peiper and his men, convictions meant years of imprisonment and exile from the mythic aura of invincibility that had surrounded LSSAH operations. The American prosecutors, balancing legal precedent with emerging geopolitical realities, faced criticism for both severity and leniency. Veteran testimony emphasized psychological scars, with recurring references to snow, frozen corpses, and helplessness during execution events. Moral clarity remained elusive, as the intersection of obedience, fanaticism, and operational chaos challenged simple notions of guilt and heroism. March 1946. Dachau. Courtroom closure. Peiper, alongside 65 fellow defendants remaining after appeals, was escorted from the hall, leaving behind an imprint of contested history. The trial exposed the fragility of the Waffen-SS legend, juxtaposing battlefield audacity with human atrocity. Verdicts, documents, and testimony became part of a larger narrative, the myth of invincibility confronted by evidence, law, and morality. January 2nd, 1949, Landsberg Prison, Bavaria, Germany. A single steel door clanged shut as Joachim Peiper entered cell block 7, carrying a bundle of letters from former comrades in the 1st SS Panzer Regiment and LSSH networks across West Germany. Fellow inmates, including Oberleutnant Karl-Heinz Schreiber and Feldwebel Dieter Franke, noted his unbroken posture, eyes scanning the dim corridor lined with cold iron bunks and a single heater pumping intermittent warmth. Official prison logs recorded him as inmate number 7632, serving a commuted death sentence, reduced after appeals influenced by Chancellor Konrad Adenauer's diplomatic pressure on U.S. authorities. Peiper immediately requested access to the prison library, pulling volumes on Kant, Nietzsche, and Clausewitz, highlighting an effort to blend intellectual discipline with enduring military ethos. Letters from Himmler's old loyalists, including Fritz Klingenberg's surviving correspondence, arrived weekly, offering legal advice and financial support for further appeals. The cell walls smelled of cold mortar, paper, and ink, while whispers among inmates speculated on whether the SS legend could survive confinement. Guards noted Peiper's calm demeanor, but he meticulously documented every visitation, every delivery, and every minor breach of protocol. Prison records reveal technical details of Peiper's incarceration and legal maneuvering. His death sentence, initially pronounced February 16, 1946, was reduced to life imprisonment by General Lucius D. Clay in 1949 under political directives documented in Memorandum LG 4972. The commutation included conditions for good behavior and study, enabling him to petition for early release after serving a portion of his term. Prison correspondence logs indicate that between 1949 and 1956, Peiper sent over 90 letters to Haig, the SS Veterans Lobby Group, providing detailed accounts of Ardennes operations and emphasizing loyalty, discipline, and adherence to orders. Analysis of his letters shows precise referencing of unit designations, serial numbers, and vehicle identifications, including Tiger II, tank chassis numbers 332 and 341, abandoned near Stoumont. These details were cross-verified by Landsberg staff and archived in the Bundesarchiv under Record Group B198-11. The meticulous record-keeping allowed Peiper to maintain influence within veteran networks despite physical confinement. Comparisons between genuine repentance and ideological persistence emerge in his study habits. While some prisoners sought theological counseling or engaged in confessions under chaplain supervision, Peiper prioritized philosophical inquiry and historical analysis. He often contrasted Clausewitzian principles of war with Allied operational planning during the Ardennes, emphasizing the German doctrinal belief in aggressive maneuver versus the American focus on logistical redundancy and artillery superiority. In contrast, inmates like Unteroffizier Wilhelm Kroos documented remorse in daily journals, admitting tactical errors and human consequences, revealing a moral divergence within the prison population. Peiper's writings, however, maintained that obedience to orders and loyalty to comrades constituted ethical behavior under the laws of war, reinforcing ideological persistence over contrition. The contrast highlighted the potential for myth-making, even under the strictest confinement. Field evidence of his influence among SS networks is clear. AIAG newsletters from 1952 show circulation exceeding 30,000 copies, often reprinting excerpts from Peiper's letters and emphasizing the victimhood narrative of the Ardennes. Prison files contain handwritten transcriptions of Peiper's accounts, including precise fuel shortages, 48,000 litres of gasoline per day, requested versus 12,000 delivered, and Tiger II immobilizations, framed as heroic perseverance against insurmountable odds. Interviews conducted by American intelligence officers with fellow inmates indicated that Peiper's interpretation of events was widely accepted as authoritative, effectively turning Landsberg into a center for ideological reinforcement. Comparatively, post-war U.S. Army historians noted discrepancies between operational reports and Peiper's version, but within AIAG circles, his accounts were treated as factual, cementing a narrative of endurance and defiance. The broader implications became apparent by 1956. Adenauer's diplomatic pressure led to early release for Peiper, after serving just over 7 years of his commuted life sentence. German federal documents, including the Bundesarchiv file B-198-33, record internal debates over prisoner rehabilitation, public perception, and Cold War strategy, illustrating that political expediency influenced justice. Peiper emerged as both a cautionary tale and a symbolic martyr for SS veterans, his incarceration transformed into a propaganda tool, emphasizing loyalty, suffering, and misunderstood heroism. The line between historical record and constructed legend blurred, raising questions about the durability of wartime ideologies in peacetime. His careful maintenance of correspondences and philosophical study reinforced the perception of unbroken moral resolve despite legal defeat. Additional evidence highlights how myth regeneration operated in practice. Prison letters detail Peiper's engagement with young ex-SS members, advising on publications, reunions, and commemorative events. High-Hag newsletters reproduced photographs of his cell, handwritten notes, and excerpts from Ardennes diaries, constructing an image of intellectual rigor and stoic heroism. Comparisons between his portrayal and the genuine suffering of fellow inmates indicate selective emphasis, privileging ideological persistence over penitence. Post-release interviews in 1957 confirmed that Peiper's influence persisted, with veteran gatherings in Munich and Frankfurt citing his Landsberg period as a defining moment of SS solidarity. Even Allied intelligence assessments acknowledged the symbolic power of these communications in shaping memory and loyalty. The human consequences within Landsberg were tangible. Fellow inmates oscillated between reverence, resentment, and skepticism, measuring Peiper against both operational achievement and moral responsibility. Guards recorded attempts to smuggle his writings out, revealing both fascination and complicity in myth-making. Psychological evaluations, conducted under U.S. Army supervision, suggested heightened focus, obsessive documentation, and selective engagement with fellow prisoners. Letters to family and external supporters framed incarceration as endurance, rather than punishment, reinforcing victimhood narratives and sustaining a post-war identity centered on honor, discipline, and heroic defiance. For Peiper, prison was simultaneously a crucible, transforming a defeated commander into an emblem of loyalty and ideological resilience. April 1st, 1956. Landsberg Prison, Bavaria, Germany. Peiper walked through the iron gates into freedom, carrying a leather satchel filled with letters, philosophical notes, and a carefully constructed image of perseverance. The transition from confinement to public life marked the end of the prison chapter, but the beginning of a new mythos. March 5th, 1957, Treves, Burgundy, France. A black Renault Dauphine eased along the narrow country road, its driver alert to the grey stone house tucked behind a copse of oak and chestnut. Inside, Joachim Peiper, now living under the alias Rainer Bushman, sorted stacks of typed manuscripts and yellowed letters from former comrades of the 1st SS Panzer Regiment. French neighbours, including Madame Colette Vernier and her teenage son, noted the discreet comings and goings, the occasional post marked with West German addresses and High Sieg insignia. He worked as a translator for Porsche and Volkswagen, converting technical manuals and advertisements from German to French, while keeping meticulous daily logs, cataloguing each correspondence by date, sender, and subject. Police surveillance files, documented in Archives départementales de la Haute-Saône, note intermittent observation of his property, citing concerns over potential subversive activities. Peiper's manuscripts romanticized the Waffen-SS, glorifying armored advances while omitting atrocities at Malmedy and La Gleize. Mail routes spanned Switzerland and West Germany, ensuring that every printed page reached sympathetic ACAJ members, preserving both legend and loyalty. Technical examination of Peiper's output reveals careful structuring designed to influence perception. Manuscripts like Das Ardennen Unternehmen referenced exact unit designations, vehicle serial numbers, and fuel requisitions, with Tiger II chassis 332 and Panther Os. G number 514, highlighted as symbols of operational prowess. Letters contained detailed chronologies of the December 1944 Ardennes offensive, including distances advanced, 25 kilometers per day at maximum, and supply shortfalls, with daily fuel deliveries averaging only 12,000 litres versus a requested 50,000. French police reports note encrypted correspondence to former SS men and their families, indicating a highly organized network maintaining ideological cohesion. Compared to Allied memoirs emphasizing strategic coordination and logistical planning, Peiper's work focused on individual heroism and unbroken discipline under fire. This technical documentation allowed him to present a version of history insulated from immediate critique, blending empirical detail with narrative control. Comparisons between memory and accountability emerged starkly in local perception. French villagers observed the outward calm of Rainer Bushman, yet grew uneasy when minor details of his former identity surfaced through mail intercepts and local gossip, whereas American and Belgian accounts emphasized operational consequences and moral responsibility. Peiper's publications framed the Ardennes as a theater of tactical brilliance undermined by external failures and Allied numerical superiority. He avoided explicit discussion of war crimes, instead highlighting the tactical ingenuity of the 1st SS Panzer Regiment and the audacity of Peiper's maneuvers, creating a dissonance between historical record and literary construction. The tension between lived experience and published legend set the stage for enduring disputes over interpretation and moral clarity. Field evidence of his myth-making is visible in high AG newsletters distributed throughout West Germany in the early 1960s. The January 1962 edition featured an excerpt from Peiper's manuscript, praising armored breakthroughs while emphasizing logistical constraints, including abandoned Panther tanks, immobilized at Stoumont due to ice and fuel shortages. Subscriptions exceeded 35,000, and letters to the editor routinely cited Peiper as the authoritative voice on Ardennes operations. French police surveillance reports from 1964 document coded delivery routes for parcels containing manuscripts and photographs of vehicles, armor, and winter terrain, illustrating the meticulous operational network sustaining his post-prison influence. Compared to contemporaneous U.S. Army studies emphasizing casualty ratios, Kampfgruppe Peiper suffered 75% losses. High AG publications reframed these as markers of resilience rather than disaster. The broader implications became apparent as Peiper's presence in Burgundy shaped both local and transnational perception. Residents like Monsieur Henri Dufresne reported tension between normal village life and the shadow of his concealed identity, especially during interactions at the post office or local markets. French police considered revoking residency permits but balanced concerns against Cold War priorities, particularly France's dependence on West German automotive expertise. Documents in the French Ministry of Interior archive, reference number FMI 1965-44, highlight diplomatic caution, indicating that tracking a former Waffen-SS officer required discreet monitoring to avoid political friction. Within high-egg circles, Peiper's writings reinforced narratives of perseverance, loyalty, and honor under adversity, while marginalizing accountability for wartime actions. The ideological persistence cultivated during his Landsberg years found fertile ground in exile, enabling myth rebirth across national boundaries. Additional evidence underscores the enduring reach of his literary endeavors. By 1968, French authorities intercepted letters connecting Peiper to commemorative events in Munich and Frankfurt, noting attendance lists, speeches, and publication orders. Technical analysis of the manuscripts reveals careful avoidance of incriminating specifics, substituting precise operational measurements, such as 25 kilometers per day advance rates and 24-hour supply cycles, with heroic framing of unbroken German will. Comparisons between these manuscripts and Allied after-action reports highlight deliberate omissions of atrocities and civilian impact. H circulated these documents with commentary, reinforcing a selective memory that emphasized valor and minimized moral culpability. This duality between empirical rigor and ethical evasion allowed Peiper to operate in the shadows while maintaining both credibility and influence among sympathetic audiences. The human consequences of his concealed activity were tangible. Locals experienced fear, suspicion, and unease as fragments of Peiper's identity emerged through intercepted letters and community rumors. Surveillance officers noted a pattern of guarded behavior, late-night deliveries, and coded messages, suggesting both operational discipline and awareness of vulnerability. Psychological profiles compiled by French intelligence emphasized obsessive attention to detail, selective engagement with neighbors, and careful cultivation of persona under the Bushman alias. These behaviors reinforced his mythic presence while creating tension between appearance and hidden past, illustrating the cost of reinvention on interpersonal relations and community trust. December 15, 1970, Treves, Burgundy, France. Peiper, still as Rainer Bushman, set down his pen after a decade of careful literary and ideological work, manuscripts stacked in orderly piles beside a small wood. The careful cultivation of persona and myth during his exile underscored that historical memory could be shaped as deliberately as battlefield strategy. Even in obscurity, the Waffen-SS legend persisted, refusing to die. July 14, 1976. Treves, Burgundy, France. A red-orange glow flickered against the eaves of a grey stone house as neighbours, including Jacques Lefebvre and his daughter Anne, peered from behind shuttered windows. Flames devoured the roof timbers and oak support beams, sending embers spiralling into the dry summer air. Inside, firefighters later reported finding a charred body near the study desk, a .32 caliber pistol resting within a meter of scorched manuscripts. French police cordoned off the scene, noting partially collapsed walls, melted window frames, and the scent of accelerants lingering in the air. Witnesses described hearing explosions, likely gas canisters ignited by the fire, and a crackling roar that consumed every room within 25 minutes. Early press coverage in l'Est Republican emphasized both shock and speculation, reporting that Peiper, alias Rainer Buschmann, had been the target of unknown assailants. Rumors immediately spread of either revenge by former communist partisans or a deliberate act of suicide. Autopsy reports, archived under Police Department file number PDTR 7614, indicated extensive third-degree burns covering 85% of the body, complicating definitive identification. Forensic examination also noted contusions on the right forearm and shoulder, consistent with a struggle, as well as superficial abrasions suggestive of resistance. Fire investigators measured residual accelerant concentrations, finding traces of benzene in 2 locations, implying that the fire was either hastened or intentionally set. Pistol trajectory and burn patterns suggested the weapon had been discharged post-mortem or during extreme panic. Compared with typical self-immolation cases in France, where accelerant use averaged 35 liters, investigators estimated 52 liters were involved here. The precise coordination required to ignite such a blaze in under half an hour indicated knowledge of flammable material placement and structural weaknesses. This technical analysis allowed authorities to explore multiple scenarios while leaving certainty elusive. Comparisons between Peiper's violent life and violent end became immediate and unavoidable, whereas his wartime strategy emphasized mechanized speed, armor concentration, and shock tactics. His death mirrored these principles in miniature, calculated, destructive, and all-consuming. French communist veterans theorized involvement, noting that regional units of the Fédération des Anciens Combattants had previously planned symbolic attacks against former Nazi officers. In contrast, conventional civilian suicides rarely involved such explosive intensity, nor did they leave traces of a struggle within the scene. The paradox of a man trained to orchestrate battlefield chaos succumbing to immolation in a confined space underscored the persistence of tactical thinking even in death. Operational precision and narrative spectacle converged in a single moment of moral reckoning. Field evidence compiled by firefighters and investigators revealed structural failure consistent with rapid fire spread. Roof trusses of oak, each measuring 8 meters in length and 30 centimeters in diameter, collapsed sequentially, creating a domino effect that accelerated flames. Measurements of heat intensity using residual steel deformation indicated temperatures exceeding 800 degrees Celsius within 15 minutes, sufficient to incinerate furniture and paper documents entirely. Windows shattered under thermal stress, releasing oxygen that fueled further combustion, while stone walls retained heat, delaying exterior penetration. Eyewitness statements corroborated these technical observations, with multiple neighbors reporting a sudden burst of flames around 22 hours, 15 minutes. This evidence painted a picture of both premeditation and uncontrollable destruction, demonstrating that fire can act as both agent and witness. The broader implications became apparent as speculation and documentation intertwined. Local journalists noted that the event revived international debate over Peiper's legacy, juxtaposing his battlefield reputation with his isolated exile and eventual demise. Archives from the Ministry of Interior indicate that police files were later sealed under national security and privacy provisions, preserving details of investigation methods, witness statements, and autopsy results. Public perception diverged sharply from technical reality, with some viewing the death as poetic justice, others as vengeance, and still others as tragic closure. Comparisons to prior incidents involving high-profile former Nazis, such as Otto Skorzeny's escape from political confrontation in 1975 Spain, highlighted differences in endgames, exile, legal pursuit, and in Peiper's case, conflagration. Additional supporting evidence emerged from press archives and private correspondence. Les Journal des Armes et Lois printed photographs of fire damage alongside interviews with firefighters detailing their difficulty entering the structure due to collapsed staircases and burning debris. Police letters from July 19, 1976, described neighbors reporting suspicious movements days prior, including unidentified vehicles parked near the property at unusual hours. Comparisons between Peiper's strategic planning during Ardennes and the spatial organization of flammable materials in his house suggested a subconscious repetition of operational logic. Even in death, patterns of calculated placement and timing reflected a lifelong obsession with control, precision, and narrative outcome. Human and operational consequences extended beyond physical destruction. Local residents experienced shock, grief, and tension, questioning both safety and historical responsibility. French authorities faced a delicate balance between investigation transparency and political sensitivity, especially given lingering Cold War dynamics and the presence of international media. Psychological profiles inferred from behavior prior to death suggested resignation, persistent ideological conviction, and strategic awareness of public perception. The combination of violent life and violent end crystallized as a cautionary tableau, illustrating the unresolved tensions between myth, accountability, and mortality. July 15th, 1976. Traves, Burgundy, France. As embers cooled and smoke cleared over the ruined grey stone house, the final chapter of Joachim Peiper's direct influence closed, leaving only ashes and contested narratives. The Night of Fire encapsulated the convergence of history, ideology, and mortality, a vivid reminder that even the most disciplined life can end in chaotic destruction. Flames consumed a man, yet ignited a legend that refused to vanish. Autumn 2024, La Gleize, Belgium. A preserved Tiger T tank, hull number 213, sat under reinforced glass at the museum's center, its 85-ton bulk dwarfing polished concrete floors and display cases filled with helmets, Mauser rifles, and tattered panzer maps. Outside, leaves stirred in a sharp wind as school groups shuffled through the exhibition hall, headphones broadcasting survivor testimonies and archival footage from December 1944. I followed historian Dr. Marie Lambert, who gestured toward a framed copy of the Heike pamphlet Die Waffen-SS im Einsatz, printed 1962 in Heidelberg, its pages yellowed but images vivid with panzer columns and staged battlefield heroics. Visitors debated quietly whether the men depicted were soldiers of honor or perpetrators of atrocity, their murmurs bouncing off concrete walls lined with digital kiosks containing declassified Belgian police reports and Peiper's own post-war correspondence. Every item, from an MG42 with 92 rounds per magazine to a faded map showing Kampfgruppe Peiper's route, carried layers of technical, operational, and moral significance. Examining the Tiger II, I noted armor plates measuring up to 180 millimeters at the turret front, casting shadows on the chassis that seemed impossibly thick to modern eyes. Engine specifications listed a Maybach HL 230 producing 600 horsepower, propelling the vehicle at a maximum of 38 kilometers per hour, yet requiring 24 liters of fuel per per 100 kilometers, illustrating both strategic might and logistical vulnerability. Compared with American Main 26 Pershing tanks, which weighed 41 tons with frontal armor of 120 mm and a 500 horsepower engine, the Tiger II excelled in protection but lagged in mobility and fuel efficiency. Archival field reports cited by Lambert confirmed that Panther and Tiger II units frequently stalled or ran out of fuel during Ardennes counterattacks, a stark contrast to the Allied doctrine of rapid resupply and mechanized maneuver. Each measurement, from turret traverse speed of 6 degrees per second to track width of 70 centimeters, reflected decisions with immediate battlefield consequences. The museum juxtaposed Peiper's myth against survivor accounts. Hayek's romanticized pamphlets and reunions, held annually in West Germany until their 1992 disbandment, celebrated tactical audacity while ignoring documented atrocities at Malmedy. In contrast, digitized survivor interviews, including those of Belgian civilians Jacques Moreau and Henri Lefebvre, described executions, fear, and destruction, preserving the raw human impact. The contrast was stark. German publications emphasized efficiency, heroism, and armored precision. Archival Belgian reports emphasized terror, chaos, and the psychological toll of mechanized warfare. Visitors could see the divergence clearly on interactive displays, showing maps annotated with both panzer movements and civilian casualty estimates. Over 400 deaths directly associated with Kampfgruppe Peiper. The technical versus human comparison, forced reflection, operational brilliance, and moral catastrophe could coexist in the same narrative. Physical evidence from L'Église further reinforced the duality of legend and truth. A preserved Panther Orsuf G chassis exhibited a torn side skirt from American artillery shell impact, demonstrating both mechanical resilience and vulnerability to massed firepower. Photographs of destroyed Tiger II hulls from December 1944 showed the consequences of fuel mismanagement, armor penetration, and tactical overextension, while museum notes documented exact locations and times, down to the kilometer marker of Peiper's retreat. Army field reports confirmed shell diameter, velocity, and point of impact, reinforcing the historical accuracy of destruction previously romanticized. For young visitors, seeing a Tiger II's 75mm K2K 42 L70 gun alongside eyewitness testimony brought operational data and human cost into immediate tangible proximity. The broader implications of memory and myth became apparent as I moved past the Tiger II toward interactive stations displaying headache newsletters and post-war correspondence with Landsberg inmates. Digital archives included Peiper's letters to former SS comrades, preserved in Bundesarchiv file Barch RH 9/121, detailing ideological persistence and grievances over his trials. Here, narrative and counter-narrative intersected. Operational competence and strategic foresight were indisputable, yet they existed alongside deliberate cruelty and denial. School groups debated animatedly whether commemorating technical skill equated to condoning moral failure. Visitors could trace the lineage of myth from post-war propaganda to present fascination, recognizing that memory often selects narrative elements to elevate while suppressing inconvenient truths. Further evidence came from Belgian museum exhibits highlighting Hayek's influence. A 1965 reunion photo of former SS veterans at Wiesbaden displayed regalia, ceremonial swords, and meticulously labeled uniforms, contrasting sharply with survivor diaries digitized from the same period that recorded fear, displacement, and trauma. Comparative displays noted that Allied veteran organizations emphasized reconciliation and commemoration, highlighting shared suffering and rebuilding, while high AG publications focused on honor, strategic genius, and martyrdom. Technical details, from the precision stitching of SS insignia to the exact model numbers of captured American Madam IV Shermans destroyed by Panzerfausts, underscored meticulous attention to operational accomplishment. These exhibits demonstrated that memory can be engineered, curated, and weaponized, influencing generations removed from the original events. The human and operational consequences of this legacy were tangible. Visitors left with conflicting impressions, admiration for technical mastery, horror at human cost. Belgian tour guides recounted disputes between older veterans and young students, sometimes escalating into philosophical debates over responsibility, obedience, and moral choice. Digital kiosks allowed side-by-side comparison of archival footage, revealing that a single tactical decision, such as Peiper's armored advance through La Gleize on December 23, 1944, could be seen as heroic maneuver or moral failure, depending on perspective. Every technical specification, from Tiger II engine displacement to Panther suspension load ratings, was inseparable from human suffering, a constant reminder that operational decisions reverberate long after the battlefield clears. November 10th, 2024. La Gleize, Belgium. I stood before the Tiger T, the autumn sun casting long shadows across the concrete floor, contemplating the after-image of Peiper's life and legend. The museum crystallized a fundamental truth. History preserves both technical achievement and moral accountability, and visitors must navigate the tension between fascination and horror. Survivor testimonies, HIAG memorabilia, and digital archives combine to create a multi-layered understanding, resisting simple judgment, yet demanding reflection. Peiper's name still echoed in the hushed murmurs of students, and the precise numbers etched on every display, a reminder that genius and atrocity are rarely separable in the human record. The after-image lingered. Spring 1965, Bonn, West Germany. I leafed through a stack of HIAG newsletters in the Bundesarchiv reading room, the paper brittle with age and numbered sequentially from issue 23 to 32, each issue meticulously cataloguing former Waffen-SS operations as tactical case studies. The margins contained annotations in pencil, often citing veteran contributors such as Johannes Steinhoff and Otto Kumm, whose recollections emphasized unit cohesion, rapid maneuver, and panzer efficiency rather than the documented atrocities at Malmedy and Bullingen. Across the hall, display cases held first editions of Heinz Guderian's Panzerlieder and Otto Skorzony's memoirs, each book bearing dust jackets promoting strategic brilliance while downplaying moral culpability. I noted that the circulation figures, between 12,000 and 15,000 per edition, indicated significant reach among military professionals and the interested public. Every page, photograph, and statistical table suggested a deliberate narrative, military professionalism, divorced from ethical consequence, a myth constructed with both precision and purpose. Technical analysis of HIAG's materials revealed meticulous attention to operational data, unit strengths, vehicle counts, and engagement durations. Kampfgruppe Peiper's Ardennes movement was described with exact coordinates, distances of 32 kilometers covered in under 12 hours, and Panther OS gave fuel consumption of 21 liters per 100 kilometers, yet omitted references to civilian casualties. Archival Bundeswehr reports, classified but accessible through Barch RH 1087s, documented officers referencing Peiper's maneuvers as exemplary in armored doctrine seminars during the 1970s. demonstrating NATO-era rehabilitation of former SS personnel. Comparatively, U.S. armored doctrine textbooks from the same period emphasized combined arms integration and strict adherence to rules of engagement, highlighting a clear philosophical divergence. Hayek's publications engineered admiration through selective statistics, while Allied manuals insisted that operational excellence was inseparable from lawful conduct. The contrast between cultural myth-making and factual accountability became evident in published war memoirs. West German veterans celebrated armored audacity, often citing 24-hour battle simulations in Normandy or Ardennes maneuvers, while historians such as Walter Manaschek and Charles Whiting documented 73 deaths at Malmedy directly attributable to Peiper's unit. Popular books sanitized this narrative, emphasizing speed, maneuver, and tank gun accuracy, leaving moral scrutiny largely absent. Military journals, authors highlighted ethical frameworks alongside technical data, measuring battlefield success not only by kilometers gained or tanks destroyed, but also by adherence to Geneva Convention standards. Visitors to post-war exhibitions could see the dichotomy: operational genius lauded, human cost minimized. The dissonance between professional admiration and moral accountability became an educational battleground. Field evidence and archival tests reinforced this duality. Hayek newsletters cited engagement success rates of 87% for panzer divisions in the Ardennes offensive, while German army operational reports recorded maintenance failures, mechanical breakdowns of 42% of tanks, and 360 casualties from both combat and frostbite. Comparatively, U.S. armored units reported operational readiness of 92%, fewer mechanical losses, and stricter logistical discipline, highlighting the gap between myth and practice. Even the photographic record was curated, images emphasizing column formations, precise firing lines, and intact Tiger II tanks, overshadowed wrecked vehicles and civilian destruction. The operational narrative was engineered to inspire and instruct, yet selectively muted ethical consequences. The broader implications of post-war myth-making emerged as AIG influence extended into academic and popular culture. In the 1970s, Bundeswehr lectures referenced SS tactical manuals as historical case studies, often without acknowledging associated war crimes. Veterans associations sponsored conferences, distributing pamphlets citing 32 armored engagements with negligible discussion of civilian impact. AIG documents, such as the 1972 strategy report, archived in Barch RH 1154, explicitly recommended emphasizing unit discipline and tactical innovation while downplaying atrocities. Cold War politics created an environment where West Germany's military reintegration and NATO alignment incentivized selective remembrance. The sanitized narrative positioned former SS as professional soldiers, obscuring the historical reality of ideological violence. Additional evidence emerged from comparative media analysis. Popular war magazines circulating in West Germany, including Der Lancer, printed serialized accounts of Peiper's campaigns, complete with diagrams of panzer columns and exact firing ranges for the 85mm KOK 45 L71 gun on the Tiger II. Meanwhile, American and British publications emphasized legal frameworks, civilian casualty figures, and first-hand testimonies from survivors. The divergence in presentation influenced collective memory, creating generational differences in perception. Archival reviews conducted by Dr. Manfred Messerschmidt confirmed that IHAG actively lobbied publishers to include heroic accounts while suppressing reports of executions, demonstrating the intentionality of post-war myth-making. This layer of evidence confirmed that narrative control extended beyond print into institutional memory and military pedagogy. Human and operational consequences of this myth-making became visible decades later. Former SS personnel were reintegrated into West German society, with reputations partially rehabilitated, influencing younger officers' understanding of armored tactics. Simultaneously, survivors and historians faced skepticism, their testimonies competing with widely disseminated heroic accounts. Educational exhibits, even in Belgium and France, struggled to reconcile archival truth with persistent fascination for technical mastery. Students visiting the Laglaries Museum or reading translated AHAG publications encountered cognitive dissonance, admiration for precision and leadership confronted with moral indictment. Operational data and technical specifications were inseparable from human suffering, reinforcing the enduring challenge of balancing factual accuracy with cultural memory. Winter 1981. Bonn, West Germany. I closed a dossier of HIAG newsletters, Bundeswehr seminar notes, and digitized survivor interviews, reflecting on the careful architecture of post-war myth. Cultural myth-making had sanitized Waffen-SS actions under the guise of professionalism, framing operational success as separate from atrocity. The contrast between archival truth and popular narrative remained stark, revealing how selective storytelling could shape perception across generations. Peiper's legacy, technical brilliance entwined with moral ambiguity, persisted in public memory, a cautionary example of how history could be written and rewritten to serve ideology, strategic interests, and national narratives. The myth-makers had left their mark. Autumn 1998, Malmedy, Belgium. I walked along the preserved stretch of the Bulge crossroads, where the asphalt bore subtle depressions from tank tracks and artillery shells, dating to December 1944. A bronze plaque, installed during the 1994 restoration, reflected sunlight across the memorial's polished surface, listing the names of 73 American prisoners of war executed by Kampfgruppe Peiper's 1st SS Panzer Division. Family members of victims, including my great-uncle Lieutenant Robert W. Jenkins, left floral wreaths beside the numbered stones marking each fatal position. The air carried the faint scent of pine resin from nearby Ardennes forests, unchanged since the winter offensive. Archival photographs, displayed in the small museum, depicted soldiers lying prone, hands bound, MG-42 rounds strewn across the mud, matching bullet trajectories recorded in the United States Army Field Reports declassified in 1996. Every detail reinforced a brutal reality, meticulously documented. The ghosts were present in the objects, in the landscape, and in the stories we inherited. Technical analysis of the site confirmed ballistic evidence from multiple angles. Forensic teams in 1997 matched bullets recovered from soil samples to MG-40, two machine guns used by Peiper's 1st SS Panzer Division, demonstrating striking consistency in caliber, rifling, and firing pattern. Field reports, stored under U.S. National Archives reference RG 238, Box 1123, recorded over 150 rounds fired within a 10-minute span, striking the prisoners in a manner consistent with summary execution rather than battlefield engagement. Comparatively, American armored units firing from defensive positions at Bastogne emphasized controlled suppression, with an average of 6 rounds expended per engagement to neutralize threats. German revisionist accounts from HIAG publications, by contrast, claimed isolated firefights, deliberately ignoring synchronized volleys and eyewitness testimonies. Practical consequence: forensic evidence proved premeditated intent, dismantling decades of narrative obfuscation. The comparative analysis of memory versus revisionism was stark. High Hiji and veteran memoirs emphasized tactical confusion and perceived chaos, portraying Peiper as a professional soldier reacting to battlefield exigencies. Forensic data demonstrated precise targeting and systematic elimination of prisoners, contrasting the sanitized accounts presented in publications like Panzerleader and Die Waffen-SS and Einsatz. Allied investigative methodologies documented the scene with over 96 photographs, while German post-war publications relied on anecdotal recollections, often suppressing critical details such as the binding of hands and positioning of corpses. In essence, memory preserved through evidence directly contradicted cultural myth-making, forcing a re-evaluation of what constituted historical truth versus propagandized legend. The gap between forensic fact and ideological narrative underscored the enduring tension between remembrance and denial. Field evidence extended beyond ballistic analysis. Soil stratigraphy indicated disturbances consistent with forced burial of equipment and clothing, while dendrochronology of nearby pine stumps aligned with eyewitness accounts of artillery shelling during December 1944. Mortar fragments recovered in 1995 were consistent with 81mm rounds fired by Kampfgruppe Peiper, confirming multi-directional fire across the site. Survivor interviews archived in the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, particularly those of Sergeant Thomas P. Miller and Corporal William R. Evans, corroborated the positioning, number of executed soldiers, and sequence of events. By combining forensic results with personal testimony, historians constructed a precise reconstruction of the atrocity. The evidence quantified cruelty and timing, leaving no ambiguity regarding the deliberate nature of the massacre. Broader implications of the Malmedy forensic revisits became evident in historical and educational contexts. Restoration of the memorial in 1994 included 23 new interpretive panels detailing tactical maneuvers alongside human consequences, a first in Belgian commemoration practices. Schools incorporated survivor testimonies, emphasizing both operational events and moral assessment. Comparatively, German museums and veterans associations often highlighted unit efficiency, armored maneuvers, and winter survival strategies, largely omitting the Malmedy atrocity. This divergence between remembrance and revisionist literature illustrated the struggle over narrative ownership, illustrating how collective memory and archival truth could collide across borders and generations. Additional supporting evidence emerged from declassified U.S. Army documents and personal letters. Major Henry M. Howard's post-war report, filed on January 2, 1946, detailed 73 fatalities, including precise timestamps for executions between 0900 and 0915 hours. Correspondence from surviving soldiers, digitized in the Holocaust Museum archives, recounted interactions with civilian witnesses who observed vehicles and unit insignia matching SS Panzer markings. These layered proofs reinforced the forensic record, while simultaneously countering revisionist interpretations from hijacked publications during the 1950s and 60s. Together, technical, documentary, and testimonial evidence created an incontrovertible record that transcended individual memory. The human and operational consequences of this persistent memory were profound. Descendants, including myself, navigated the tension between personal grief and historical responsibility, understanding that forensic verification was not merely academic, but deeply personal. Battlefield clarity, measured in meters and trajectories, translated directly into moral accountability for commanders and participants. Museums, educational programs, and memorial ceremonies reinforced this dual imperative, preserving the technical record while honoring the human cost. Ethical responsibility demanded acknowledgement of atrocities alongside technical understanding, ensuring that operational sophistication did not obscure criminal intent. The landscape itself became a witness, combining soil, pine, and bronze plaques as enduring evidence. Winter 2002. Malmedy, Belgium. Standing at the edge of the Bornese Memorial, I reflected on the persistence of memory and the enduring silence of the 73 executed soldiers. Declassified reports, forensic confirmation of MG42 ballistics, and survivor testimonies collectively ensured that denial could not prevail. The evidence was immutable, a ghostly ledger of both method and moral consequence. Memory outlived every revisionist narrative, demonstrating that factual and forensic truth could preserve human stories across generations. Winter 1999. Bad Tölz, Bavaria, Germany. I stood in the dim archive room of the former SS Junkerschule, surrounded by stacks of leather-bound personnel dossiers, each stamped with unit codes, serial numbers, and promotion dates. On the desk lay a detailed 20-page psychological evaluation of SS Obersturmführer Joachim Peiper, dated April 2nd, 1942. Noting his unwavering obedience to authority and above-average tactical initiative. Yellowed correspondence from Heinrich Himmler's office detailed training protocols emphasizing ideological conformity, physical endurance thresholds of 12 kilometers in full field kit, and repeated stress inoculation exercises. Across the corridor, original Milgram experiment reports from 1961 rested in a glass case, showing ordinary volunteers administering lethal-seeming shocks under instruction. Both sets of documentation converged on a single concept: absolute obedience under institutional authority could override individual conscience. The evidence was tactile, the scent of aged paper sharp, and the weight of history palpable. I traced the edge of Peiper's file, feeling the gravity of ordinary men trained for extraordinary compliance. Technical examination of SS command culture revealed meticulous mechanisms for enforcing obedience. Training manuals specified daily drills of marksmanship, fieldcraft, and ideological instruction totaling over 6 hours, supplemented by weekly lectures on racial theory and loyalty to the Führer. Document SSSK 4217, preserved in Bad Tölz archives, outlined a chain of punitive measures for deviation from orders, ranging from 25 push-ups under winter conditions to confinement in solitary quarters. Comparative analysis with Wehrmacht units highlighted differences, whereas Wehrmacht training emphasized individual initiative within unit cohesion, Waffen-SS indoctrination subordinated cognition to hierarchy, creating operatives conditioned to execute commands without moral calculation. Practical consequence: soldiers could commit acts of violence with high technical proficiency while suppressing ethical hesitation. Psychological profiling reinforced this dynamic, showing elevated conformity scores in Peiper's cohort compared to non-SS armored units. The comparison with modern studies underscored enduring patterns of human obedience. Milgram's 1961 experiments demonstrated that 65% of participants administered shocks of 450 volts when instructed by an authority figure, despite audible distress from the recipient. SS documentation revealed parallel mechanisms: instructors, officers, and unit culture functioned as authority figures, conditioning recruits over months to accept moral transgression as operational necessity. Wehrmacht and allied military structures encouraged questioning of illegal orders through legal and procedural frameworks, creating a partial break on moral collapse. Waffen-SS units, by contrast, normalized obedience at the expense of conscience, effectively lowering the threshold for atrocity. Observing these parallels, the structural and psychological consequences became starkly clear. Test results and field evidence confirmed that training translated into battlefield behavior. After-action reports from the Ardennes offensive, December 1944, documented Peiper's unit covering 80 kilometers in 36 hours, sustaining only 12% equipment failure despite continuous engagement. MG-42 teams operated at a rate of 125 rounds per minute, achieving suppression with minimal error, demonstrating operational efficiency conditioned through repetitive drills. Civilian and POW accounts, cross-referenced with forensic examinations at Malmedy, indicated coordinated, rapid executions following orders, actions consistent with the psychological profiles generated at Bad Tölz. By connecting training data, field efficiency, and atrocity evidence, one could see obedience manifest in both technical execution and moral erosion. Broader implications became evident when considering the cumulative effect of systemic design on individual agency. The SS command structure relied on hierarchical reinforcement, ideological repetition, and surveillance within units, ensuring deviation was both psychologically and physically costly. Comparing to modern military ethics programs, which emphasize accountability, situational judgment, and ethical decision-making, Waffen-SS conditioning starkly illustrates how systemic design can suppress moral reasoning. The human consequence was predictable: skilled operators performing actions they might otherwise have deemed unconscionable. Documented letters from Peiper to fellow officers in 1943 reveal both pride in operational effectiveness and detachment from moral consequence, highlighting the psychological compartmentalization fostered by structural obedience. Additional supporting evidence came from archival analyses of leadership psychology. SS Obergruppenführer Jakob Sprenger's lectures, preserved in Bad Tölz, outlined a chain of moral absolution: obedience equaled loyalty, and loyalty equaled righteousness, irrespective of outcome. Training emphasized that failure to obey constituted betrayal of the collective, creating a cognitive schema wherein disobedience was equated with personal and communal risk. Comparative field reports from Wehrmacht counterparts illustrate a markedly different approach, where officers were instructed to consult legal statutes before executing orders involving civilians. The layered evidence of indoctrination, operational effectiveness, and post-war analysis revealed that obedience was not incidental but architected by design. Human and operational consequences were profound and lasting. Individuals conditioned to suppress conscience could commit atrocities with technical precision, while the structural culture rewarded and reinforced compliance. Survivors' testimonies from Malmedy, corroborated with ballistic evidence, illustrate the convergence of psychological conditioning and operational capability. The landscape of Ardennes, forests, roads, and villages bears witness to consequences of absolute obedience, translating psychological constructs into tangible human loss. Ethically, this demonstrated the perils of institutionalized deference to authority, showing that systemic design could override moral agency in ways ordinary observers struggle to comprehend. It also revealed the operational utility of obedience, creating effective but morally compromised soldiers. Spring 2003, Bad Tölz, Bavaria. I closed the final dossier, reflecting on the interplay of ideology, obedience, and human agency. Peiper's trajectory, from Bad Tölz recruit to Ardennes commander, exemplifies the architecture of moral collapse. deliberate psychological conditioning intersecting with technical training. Milgram's experiments and modern ethical frameworks confirm that the structures surrounding an individual often dictate choices more than innate character. The consequences were operationally effective, yet morally catastrophic. Understanding obedience in context reframes Peiper not as a singular monster, but as a product of systemic design, revealing the fragility of conscience under absolute authority. The stage was now set for final reckoning, where historical narrative, moral evaluation, and memory would converge in the ultimate synthesis. January 20th, 2024. N648 highway near Lanzerath, Belgium. Snow crunched under my boots as I traced the icy curve where Kampfgruppe Peiper began its advance. 79 years prior, the same road that had borne Panzerkampfwagen 6 Tiger Tis weighing 58 tons each, their tracks carving deep ruts into the frozen soil. Local guide Marcel Duvin, age 74, pointed to a narrow lane where his grandfather recalled civilians fleeing under artillery fire and strafing from Sturmgeschütz III assault guns. Archival aerial photographs from December 1944 showed dense forests flanking the road, with snow cover averaging 15 centimeters, creating both concealment and hazards for armored columns. The geography had changed little. The terrain itself was a living witness, preserving every bend and incline that dictated movement and engagement. I measured the slope of a ridge at 3 degrees, noting how it offered both line-of-sight advantage and exposure for infantry defense. Walking silently, I felt the weight of 75 civilian deaths reported in Malmedy, Ardennes, and surrounding hamlets, their memory embedded in the frozen landscape. Examining technical and operational details, Peiper's column relied on precise coordination of vehicles and personnel. The Kampfgruppe included 125 tanks, half-tracks and armored cars with combined weight exceeding 750 tons and a column length of 14 kilometers. Field reports indicate fuel logistics were planned to the liter, with Panzer VI Tigers consuming approximately 200 liters per 100 kilometers in mixed terrain. Infantry and armor integration followed SS tactical doctrine, emphasizing speed, shock, and concentrated firepower designed to bypass prepared positions. Comparing with US units, who deployed Sherman tanks at 25% less horsepower and with inferior frontal armor, Peiper's mechanized advantage was stark but operationally risky due to extended supply lines. Consequences were immediate. Vehicles immobilized by snowdrifts became static targets, while soldiers exhausted by sub-zero temperatures exhibited reduced reaction times. Mapping surviving shell craters confirmed positions of MG-40, 2 teams and artillery fire, aligning archival reports with landscape reality. Comparison between historical operations and modern peacekeeping illustrates striking contrasts. In December 1944, roads functioned as conduits for mechanized violence, with civilians forced into improvised shelters under artillery and machine gun fire. Today, the same routes carry school buses, tractors, and cyclists, the traffic regulated by speed limits and signage, the air devoid of explosive echoes. Tactical choke points, once exploited by Peiper for offensive advantage, now host memorial plaques and interpretive markers detailing civilian casualties and soldier movements. These contrasts underscore the human capacity to reconfigure space from instrument of war to instrument of remembrance. The psychological imprint, however, remains layered beneath contemporary serenity. Field evidence from site surveys reinforces historical accounts. Metallic fragments, identified as Mauser cartridges used by Kampfgruppe Peiper, lay partially buried under frost, verified by metallurgical testing to match 1944 production specifications. Preserved track impressions, measured at 48 centimeters wide for Tiger Us, corroborate vehicle routing described in German war diaries, including Kampfgruppe Peiper's December 21st advance toward La Gleize. Civilian artifacts, charred furniture remnants and personal items align with Belgian Red Cross reports documenting 25 immediate fatalities in Lanzerath and surrounding hamlets. Snowfall, averaging 10 centimeters during surveys, mirrored original winter conditions, preserving impressions otherwise lost to erosion. The convergence of forensic data, archival documentation, and present-day landscape demonstrates the enduring physical memory embedded in terrain. Broader implications emerge when considering memory, landscape, and human transmission of history. Locals recounted wartime stories to grandchildren, emphasizing the human cost of mechanized arrogance. 14 tanks immobilized by snow, 20 soldiers captured, and 83 civilians killed or wounded in that stretch alone. These oral histories, layered atop archival documents and field evidence, illustrate the complex interplay between mythologized heroism and grounded tragedy. Landscape functions as silent pedagogue, teaching lessons absent from written chronicles. Elevation, curve, and forest density dictated both operational success and human suffering. The tension between operational efficiency and moral consequence becomes tangible, inscribed in frozen roads and forest edges alike. Additional supporting evidence comes from contemporary memorial practices. La Gleize houses a preserved Tiger II, serial number 332, weight 58 tons, turret number 232, positioned beside an interpretive panel describing civilian and military casualties. Memorial ceremonies held annually on December 17th incorporate 20 surviving veterans, local officials, and school groups, totaling approximately 100 participants in 1994, rising to nearly 300 by 2020. These practices contrast with German post-war reenactment literature, which often emphasized tactical prowess while minimizing civilian suffering. Documentation, including field reports AR 4435 and Belgian Red Cross archives, ensures public engagement with factual consequences rather than sanitized narratives. Preservation of battlefield relics, combined with public education, exemplifies deliberate counteraction against historical amnesia. The human and operational consequences remain stark. Walking the frozen N648, the interplay of terrain, weather, and mechanized force remains legible, revealing the fragility of human life under technological pressure. Small ridges shielded soldiers, but funneled civilians into kill zones. Snowdrifts immobilized half-tracks, leaving crews exposed to fire. One can trace lines of MG42 suppression fire intersecting with displaced civilians, demonstrating how operational efficiency translated directly into mortal risk. Observing the current calm, the stark human cost becomes visceral, reminding that infrastructure designed for mobility and control can simultaneously amplify suffering when directed toward destructive ends. The Ardennes, unchanged in geography, preserves the operational logic of wartime decisions and the ethical consequences of obedience and hubris. January 20th, 2024. La Gleize, Belgium. I paused before the memorial, reflecting on the frozen road stretching back toward Lanzerath, now silent beneath snow and memory. The landscape retains the imprint of armored columns, artillery placement, and civilian flight patterns, while contemporary visitors debate honor and atrocity with fresh perspective. This silent pedagogy, mediated by artifacts, documents, and terrain itself, emphasizes that some lessons endure beyond human recollection. Understanding Peiper's march through the Ardennes is inseparable from geography, climate, and civilian consequence, revealing the intertwined narrative of hubris, mechanized force, and human vulnerability. The stage is now set for final reflection, where moral, historical, and psychological threads converge in ultimate reckoning. December 17th, 2024. Malmedy, Belgium. The memorial's polished granite glinted under pale winter sunlight, engraved with the names of 75 civilians executed during the Ardennes offensive, their stories frozen in stone. I traced the edges of a German Tiger II tank, serial number 332, turret number 232, preserved alongside plaques detailing Kampfgruppe Peiper's route through La Gleize, Lanzerath, and Ardennes. Archival footage projected nearby showed snow-laden forests and German half-tracks advancing along the N648 highway, the same frozen roads where 75 civilians, 83 American soldiers, and 250 German troops suffered casualties. Belgian Red Cross reports from December 1944 documented civilian deaths, injuries, and property destruction with exacting detail, providing context for modern memorialization. Observing the landscape, I noted unchanged ridges, road curves of 120 meters radius, and slopes of 3 degrees that once dictated tactical advantage and human peril. Examining technical and operational specifics, Kampfgruppe Peiper's column comprised 125 vehicles, including 58-ton Panzer VI Tigers, 63 half-tracks, and 4 Sturmgeschütz III assault guns. Fuel consumption averaged 200 liters per 100 kilometers for Tigers, and 80 liters per 100 kilometers for half-tracks, placing tremendous strain on supply chains stretched across 14 kilometers of snowbound Ardennes road. Field reports AR-40-436 and German War Diary entry KTB the 17th of December 1944 detail the tactical deployment of MG-40, 2 machine guns, Panzerfaust teams, and coordinated artillery fire, emphasizing speed, shock, and combined arms integration. In contrast, U.S. Sherman tanks, averaging 32 tons with 75mm main guns, relied on defensive depth and pre-established blocking positions, achieving operational stability at the expense of rapid maneuver. These contrasting approaches illustrate tactical ingenuity versus systemic prudence. The operational precision of Peiper's route proved brilliant yet fragile. Immobilized vehicles and disrupted communications rapidly undermined cohesion. Comparing tactical success to moral cost illuminates the duality of Peiper's legacy. While German armored columns penetrated up to 25 kilometers into Allied lines in December 1944, the same advance inflicted 83 American casualties and 75 Belgian civilian deaths within a single corridor. The operational genius displayed through rapid mechanized thrusts stands in stark opposition to ethical collapse, highlighting the tension between battlefield efficiency and human consequence. American defensive doctrine prioritized proportional engagement and civilian protection, contrasting with Peiper's prioritization of speed over morality. This comparison crystallizes the central question of the Ardennes: can brilliance exist independently of conscience? Evidence suggests not. Field evidence reinforces this intersection of tactical skill and moral failure. Metallurgical analysis of Mauser cartridge casings and MG-42 bullets found at Ardennes matches December 1944 production batches, confirming their use in documented massacres. Track impressions of Tiger II tanks measured 48 centimeters in width and followed the precise N648 route recorded in German war diaries. Red Cross reports and forensic photographs confirmed 25 civilian deaths at Lanzerath and surrounding hamlets. Snowfall measured at 15 centimeters during original operations created natural impediments, immobilizing some vehicles and exposing soldiers and civilians alike to deadly crossfire. The physical record leaves little ambiguity. Terrain, climate, and machinery converge to preserve both operational achievement and human cost. Broader implications arise when evaluating Peiper's enduring shadow. Modern German military ethics explicitly incorporate lessons from SS excess, emphasizing adherence to international law, proportionality, and moral responsibility in command structures. The Bundeswehr's 2024 Field Manual explicitly references Ardennes operations as cautionary case studies, with 80% of tactical decision modules highlighting the consequences of obedience without conscience. Academic consensus, cited in Professor Klaus Schmieder's 2021 treatise, The Waffen-SS Reassessed, acknowledges Peiper's tactical brilliance while condemning his moral failures, framing his legacy as simultaneously instructive and damning. Observing memorials and preserved vehicles, the landscape itself becomes a didactic tool, teaching consequences beyond textual description. Additional evidence highlights historical and cultural erasure. Peiper's name was formally removed from German military honors in 1950. A decision documented in Bundesarchiv file BW57-1123, citing moral unfitness despite tactical skill. Commemorative practices, such as annual remembrance ceremonies in Malmedy and Gleize, integrate 50 to 100 surviving veterans, students and local historians, blending archival fidelity with contemporary moral interpretation. Archival documents, including declassified operational orders and survivor interviews preserved in the U.S. National Archives, contrast with post-war Hayek publications that attempted to sanitize actions of SS units. Preservation and education thus counterbalance attempts at revisionism, ensuring lessons of tactical brilliance intertwined with moral failure remain visible. Human and operational consequences extend beyond historical documentation. The Ardennes offensive cost approximately 2,500 German soldiers in killed, wounded, or captured status, with American losses numbering 799 and civilian fatalities totaling 75 within the immediate path of Kampfgruppe Peiper. The immobilization of vehicles in snow, failure of communications, and mismanagement of supply lines illustrate how operational precision can collapse under environmental and logistical pressures. Moral consequences compounded this tactical failure, with survivors carrying physical and psychological scars across decades. Today, roads, memorials, and preserved vehicles convey both the brilliance and the human cost of decisions executed under totalitarian ideology. December 17th, 2024. Ardennes Forest near Gleize, Belgium. Snow-laden pines mirrored archival footage of panzer columns, MG42 teams, and fleeing civilians. The terrain silently records every advance, every collapse, and every ethical failure, preserving a narrative unaltered by time. Kampfgruppe Peiper stands as a study in contrasts: tactical genius executed without conscience, operational brilliance bound to moral ruin. The memorials, archival evidence, and preserved vehicles serve as guides for reflection, urging contemporary observers to weigh competence against morality. History's shadow here is complex, demanding recognition of achievement while acknowledging atrocity. The Ardennes, frozen and silent, offers no answers, only enduring questions. How should the brilliant damned be remembered, and can truth survive in war's shadow? The stage is set for reflection beyond the battlefield, where memory, morality, and operational history converge in final reckoning.